We interact with strangers online every day. Occasionally, these strangers turn into friends, even though we've never met them in person. It might seem harmless to grow closer to someone who seems kind and friendly, but as the saying goes, don't trust everything you see on the internet. Today I'd like to introduce you to Samantha Jo Butler. Samantha was born on May 13, 1974, to Joe and Sharon Butler in Waurika, Oklahoma. Samantha was the oldest of 3 children. She had 2 brothers, Joe Butler Jr. and Lance. Considering Samantha was the only girl, she had a very close relationship with her mom. They were best friends. Samantha was definitely a mama's girl. She did everything with her mom. They just had this unbreakable bond, and as Samantha grew up, the bond only got stronger. Sharon was Samantha's confidant, her support system, and her biggest fan. Samantha was a very happy child. She loved to dance and sing, and she was always flashing her big, toothy smile. Her laugh was contagious, and she grew up to be a very kind and loving young woman who was loved by all of her friends, family, and her animals. Because she loved animals, especially kittens and cats, you could say she was kind of obsessed with cats. Everything was about cats. She was known to treat her cats better than she treated herself. She considered them her children. A lot of us do that. I consider my dogs kind of like my children, but I still treat them like dogs. Growing up, Samantha was very responsible. She actually helped her mom with her little baby brother Lance, and she practically raised him. She would help her mom take care of him so that her mom could work. She learned how to do everything. She was like a mini mommy. She learned how to cook and wash clothes. She absolutely loved caring for children, and she loved caring for the elderly as well. She just really enjoyed being of service to others, and this may have been due to her upbringing. She was from a small town called Terrell, Oklahoma. It's a very, very small town. The population was under 400 people back in the year 2000. Terrell is a farming town. It's close to the Texas-Oklahoma boundary line, but it is super small. This is a tiny little area. When I looked on the map, the only thing that came up was a casino, a mini-mart, and a public school. But as I zoomed in a little closer, it started to look like a town, but still a very small town. Everything just fit into this tiny square. Now, I'm not going to say just because you come from a small town that you're sheltered, but as you can see, there are only a couple of churches, a post office, a cafe, and we're looking at this on Google Maps in 2022. So it's easy to say there wasn't much to do in this small town. Samantha's family was religious, and she was raised the same. They attended church on a regular basis, and she was raised in that religious upbringing. If you're from this area, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when I looked, there was only one school, from kindergarten all the way up through high school, Terrell Public School. There it is. That's the name of it. I don't think I've ever talked about a town this small in one of my videos. This is the town that Samantha grew up in. This is all she knew. This right here is literally the street that the school is on. You can see what it looks like right there. And it's almost like a dirt road. It doesn't even look paved. Samantha spent a lot of her time around her family. She wasn't really interested in boys and dating until she met the love of her life in high school. His name was John Lezark. They met in 1988 when Samantha was just 14 years old, and he was a senior, so he was a little bit older than she was. There are some people who go on a lot of dates, get into a bunch of different relationships, kind of play the field, and maybe they don't even get married until their late 30s or later. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then there are people like Samantha who just fall in love and fall hard and never want to let the person go. She and John were high school sweethearts. They were inseparable. She loved John more than anything, maybe even more than her cats, but I'm not sure about that. Samantha really didn't start out having much of a rebellious attitude. However, it could be seen that way because she wanted to get married to John. She thought he was the one, and John felt the same way. It's tough because they know nothing else. I know how powerful emotions can be, especially after puberty, and this love can feel real. And it is real, but adults usually know it could end. Her parents only wanted the best for her, so they didn't exactly agree. They thought that she and John were a little too young. She was only 20 years old. But Samantha was going to have it her way. Nothing could stop her and John. They were in love, and she told her mother she was never going to stop loving him, no matter what. So they ended up getting married on May 10th, 1994. Samantha Butler became Samantha Lezark, and it was a very happy time. Soon after marriage, the couple wanted a place of their own. Of course, they did, and to see what life was like outside of their little town. So they decided to move to Wichita Falls, Texas. It was far enough to feel like they were on their own, but close enough that Samantha could still see her mom anytime she wanted. It was about a 40-minute drive, like a straight shot, right from one place to the other. So they moved into a decent-sized 2-story home that had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. You could get a lot for your money there. And I looked at this house. It's located at 1651 Huff Street, Wichita Falls, Texas. It's close to 2,000 square feet, and it's cute. It did need some work, but it has a nice porch out front with a swing, hardwood floors, nice-sized bedrooms, a fireplace, and a really large lot, about 8,500 square feet. So they moved in. They were happily married, and over the years, Samantha really grew into herself. She knew who she was, what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to show it. She loved reading books, music, rock music, TV shows, and tattoos. Her mom thought the tattoos were Samantha's vice, and her mom certainly didn't like them. But she would never admit that to Samantha because she loved everything about her daughter, even if she didn't particularly like it. The mother-daughter pair loved festivals. They would actually still attend festivals together, and this one in the picture I'm showing you looks like it could be a Renaissance festival. They look adorable with the flower crowns and the little dresses. Like I said, they were very close, and even after she moved away, Samantha kept in touch with her mom on a daily basis. It was actually their morning routine. As soon as they woke up, one of them would call the other, and they would talk on the phone, or they would even put their webcams on and start their day on video with each other. Samantha also found a job as a cashier at a local Albertsons, which is a grocery store chain. This might sound funny to some of us, but the town she lived in was a close-knit community, and she was very well known at the grocery store that she worked at. So much so that there were customers who would specifically go to Albertsons on the day she was working and only request to check out in Samantha's checkout line. It was because she was so friendly, caring, and helpful. She just had that personality that drew people to her. If you were in a bad mood, she knew how to cheer you up. I love people like that because I can get in a mood. I'm introverted, so it takes a lot. You've got to get me out of my shell. I bet she could be the person to do that. Samantha made friends very quickly, and 2 of her closest friends were Terry Perez and Lisa Prine. They all worked together at Albertsons, and she considered Lisa her best friend. They would hang out all the time. Samantha was a lot of fun. She was a free spirit, and that's something that matched Lisa's personality. They liked to dress pretty uniquely. They would put outfits together based on what they liked. They didn't care if other people didn't like it. They had the black lipstick, the fishnets, the rocker kind of vibe, and Samantha was very confident. She didn't mind if people hated on her choices, whether it was her outfits or her tattoos. Samantha wore them proudly. Her tattoos were very special to her. She had fairies on her arms, and then she had one on her chest with a heart. She reminds me of a cute fairy because of her cute little fairy hairstyle right here, and the tattoo on her chest with the heart and fairy was for John. It said, "Always in my heart." Just like Samantha, we all have something very deep and meaningful that we want to show on the outside. Samantha's husband, John, went to school to specialize in appliance repair after high school, specifically repairing refrigerators. Eventually, he got a job in that industry. Before that, he was a mechanic, and unfortunately he hurt his back pretty severely. He was underneath a car, working on it, and the car literally fell on top of his body. He ended up having a major back injury because of this, and so he would undergo treatments for years to come. Samantha was always supportive of him, as caring as she was, and she did what she could to make him feel as comfortable as possible after this injury. Things seemed to be going well for the couple, and toward the end of 2001, a close friend of Samantha's was in need. It was in Samantha's nature to help. Christy had been Samantha's best friend for years. She was always there to lend an ear when Kristy was dealing with things. Now, Kristy was dealing with a breakup of her marriage. One night, she came to Samantha's doorstep, crying. Samantha had more than enough room in her house. She had 4 bedrooms, so she welcomed Kristy inside and gave her a place to stay, of course. She gave her a shoulder to cry on. Well, one day when Samantha came home, she noticed someone else was giving Kristy a shoulder to cry on. Maybe more. I really hate these things. I really do. Samantha got out of work early that afternoon, and her husband John and her BFF Kristy weren't expecting her to come home. When she walked in, they were sitting on the couch, and John's arm was around her best friend, Kristy. His other hand was on her thigh. It just makes me so upset, especially considering how deep Samantha's love for John was. Samantha may have been a little naive at first. She didn't think that either one of them could do anything like that to her. She called her mom and told her what she had witnessed. She was in denial at first. She just said to her mom, Sharon, "Well, I walked in, and they kind of looked surprised." But she kept telling her mom, "There's no way they would do that to me. This is my best friend and my husband. I love him more than anything." Well, after Samantha and Sharon had that talk, Samantha decided to confront John. They knew each other so well. They had been together for 13 years at this time, and married for 8. It's true that Samantha had noticed that Kristy and John were closer than she was comfortable with for quite some time, but I guess she just let it go because she didn't want that to be true. When she asked him, "Are you cheating on me?" he finally admitted it. Not only that, but John had the audacity to tell Samantha that he was in love with Kristy. I can't even begin to imagine, because I think cheating is one of the worst things someone can do to you. It is such a deep betrayal, especially when you are married. Samantha was in unimaginable pain, and she turned to her mom for support. Sharon could not believe it. How devastating was this? You lose your best friend, the person you would go to for everything, someone you built memories with, someone that can't be easily replaced, and then you lose the love of your life. She lost both of them at once. Not only that, John decided to move out, which was a good thing, but he moved in with Kristy because now Kristy was his new girlfriend. Samantha was left all alone in this big house, where she had made 8 years of memories with her husband. All of this was happening in the summer of 2002, and what happened after this was just absolutely devastating, especially to those who loved Samantha so much. Samantha couldn't get over it. She didn't want to live anymore because her life had revolved around the man she thought she was going to spend the rest of her life with. The people close to her had never experienced someone in so much emotional pain. In the first couple of months while all this was going down, she didn't see John that much. During those months, she did a lot of drinking, spent a lot of time alone, and was in a very unhealthy place mentally. But it got worse because, when you're in this vulnerable state of mind, you can be taken advantage of by the very person who just hurt you. Even though John had moved out and seemingly moved on, they were still officially married. They were not divorced yet, just merely separated. That gave John the ability to walk in and out of Samantha's life anytime he wanted to. If he got into a little argument or a tiff with Kristy, guess where he would go? Samantha's. And Samantha would invite him in with open arms, because that's the type of person she was. And she might have thought, in the back of her mind, they could have had a chance to get back together. We won't know exactly what that entailed, but John could have given her reasons to believe that, to get what he wanted. So now, Samantha was the mistress. Samantha's the girl on the side, while he's having a relationship with her best friend. This back and forth was wearing on Samantha, and unfortunately, one night she ended up in the hospital because she drank too much and took pills. Luckily, she was rushed to the hospital in time, her stomach was pumped, and they were able to save her life. After losing Kristy as a friend, Lisa and Terry became closer and closer with Samantha. They would keep an eye on her. I could imagine how worried they would be, how scared they would be about their friend, knowing what happened. Lisa was really protective over Samantha. She wanted the best for her friend. She knew that Samantha really deserved the best. She wanted her to be happy. After a while, Samantha, being a resilient person, began to see things change for the better. There are stages of heartbreak and grief, just like the stages of grief for losing someone when they pass away. Those same stages are present when we lose someone to something like an affair. You have to go through those different stages, and on the other side of those stages, many people find a new life, even a new awakening. Being alone and having time to heal can actually build a person up. They can eventually be happier alone and realize maybe it wasn't meant to be. That was what was happening to Samantha. She had this newfound freedom. It was good for her, her soul, and her mental health, and she was spending a lot more time with her friends and her cats. She was even trying to be open to the possibility that she could love again. I don't know if you can relate, but I can. I've been through that phase of losing someone, thinking you're not ever going to be able to go on, and then learning you can love again. You can find true love, even more than you had before, with someone better. Everyone around Samantha was really happy for her. They were supportive of her getting out there and possibly dating again, and that's exactly what she planned to do. It was the early 2000s. I don't know if you can remember back to everything that was going on at that time. If you're my age, you probably do. Remember the late 90s and the early 2000s? It was a pivotal time in my life. One new thing that emerged in the late 90s was chat rooms. Do you remember America Online, AOL? It was basically the only social media back then, or at least one of the biggest. It grew to 70 million users in 1999. One of the ways that people used to talk was through a messaging service called AOL Instant Messenger, also known as AIM. Just think of it as DMs or like Facebook messaging. It's instant and in the moment. So if you're both online at the same time, it shows that, and you'll see each other's messages coming in like texts. But there weren't profiles. It didn't have anything like that. However, you did have a username. So if you wanted to, let's say, chat with someone you knew, one of your friends after school, you could just give them your username, your AIM name. Yep, and they could type it in and start a chat with you. Since I know I have viewers of all ages and I love nostalgia, I'm going to explain this for 1 second because it is pivotal that you understand chat rooms and what Samantha was doing to understand the devastating circumstances surrounding Samantha's death. This is what a chat room listing would look like back in the day. Over here on the left, it says created by people. These are the different rooms, if you will. So you would pick one that interests you. You could do food, friends, games, etc. You can see all the lists right here. On the upper right-hand side, it says chat with people like you, and then it names things like piercings, tattoos, Elvis sightings, and Britney fans. This is a real screenshot of AOL back then. America Online knew who you were and what you liked, so they would try to match you with people like you. This is how you would start an instant message with someone. You would meet them in the chat room first if you weren't already friends with them. Again, there were no pictures, it was just your name. That's it. No one could really tell who you were, which can be a good thing, but a lot of times, it's a very bad and dangerous thing. Once you find a chat room of interest, you would join. You know, I watch my daughter play Roblox, and they are all chatting, and this little chat box comes up, and it has their username. That reminds me so much of chat rooms from back in the day. Okay, this is kind of what it looks like here on my screen. You just have people chatting, and they're just kind of responding to one another. They're talking about whatever the topic is. As you're having these conversations, naturally, one or two, or many might develop into something more, like a friendship. When that happens, you can move your conversation to a private message, which is where Instant Messenger would come in. Once you do that, the chat looks like this between you and the other person. Believe it or not, I used to be in chat rooms when I was 12, and looking back, it wasn't really that safe. I don't even know who I was talking to. You don't know who you're talking to. You could potentially email them a picture, but a lot of times, I don't even remember caring what somebody looked like. It was very liberating knowing that you could just be yourself, and if you connected with someone on more of a personality level, it boosted your confidence because they liked you for you. Going back to Samantha, she was 28 years old at the time. She wasn't a child. With all the free time that she had without John around, she started to spend a lot of time in chat rooms. Samantha's username was MeowMix28 because she loved cats and she was 28 years old. Samantha liked to spend time on Yahoo Messenger, which is pretty much the exact same thing I just explained. It's like AIM from AOL, it's just a different service. Being online really seemed to make Samantha happy. It was helping her get over the pending divorce, which was currently going on, just trying to get it finalized. Following the summer months, when you're getting more into the fall season like we are now, and into the holidays, a lot of people experience seasonal depression. They go through a time where, I don't know, they don't have anyone close to them during the holidays, and everybody else is celebrating. It's a time where you want to share with someone. This was around the time that Samantha started to use the chat rooms and Messenger more and more. Lisa had noticed a change, and it was a positive one, in Samantha. So, of course, she asked her, "Is there someone new in your life? What's going on?" That's when Samantha told her about the chat rooms. This was a new thing back then, guys. Not a lot of people were doing this. Lisa was just listening and trying to understand the appeal. Samantha, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking about it. She was telling her all about her username, how she was starting to meet guys. Lisa was like, "When you say you're meeting guys, are you meeting them online, but you're not meeting them in person, right? You're not letting people come over to your house? People don't know where you live, right?" Well, from Lisa's tone, Samantha could tell that she wasn't thrilled. If this were the case, Samantha figured she probably had to lie because Samantha was meeting people in person. She knew her friends were very protective over her because of what happened just a few months ago with the incident that sent her to the hospital, and for other reasons as well. They cared about her. I think any of us would think meeting someone anonymously that you don't know and meeting them in person is pretty risky. Yeah, you don't realize how risky it really is. Even nowadays, even though we can see people, at least we can verify their identity and talk to them over FaceTime. It's still a risk because you're meeting a stranger. Coming from a small town, just going through a divorce with the man she thought she was going to spend the rest of her life with. I think it was exhilarating, because that's what her friends said. They said they didn't want to burst her bubble. They could tell she was excited. But at the same time, they were a little concerned. However, it seemed like everything was going just fine because eventually, she did tell Lisa and her mom and others that she was indeed going out on dates in real life with men that she met online. This was going on for a few months now, and most of the time, the dates were short-lived. Maybe she would go to dinner, catch a movie, maybe they would go over to each other's houses and hang out, but then it was done. Her friends weren't meeting these men, they were just hearing about them. There were some people who saw these men, her neighbors, because again, this was a close-knit community, church-going and involved in other people's business all the time. I guess you could say Samantha was a little bit more on the wild side compared to some of her neighbors in the area, so they definitely took note of the revolving door of men that were kind of going in and out. The houses were pretty close together. You could see right here in the neighborhood, it's not hard to know what your neighbor is doing. You can see them coming and going, and they can be a little judgmental. You know how that goes. The question is, are Samantha's neighbors really being judgmental, or are they being observant? We know that Samantha's coworkers were being observant because a lot of her coworkers were also close friends. It wasn't hard for them to observe something. On the morning of January 6th, 2003, Samantha didn't show up to work on time, and her friends got concerned. I told you they knew what happened just a few months ago when she ended up in the hospital. Everyone knew her business, that she was going through a divorce and that her husband cheated on her with her best friend. She wasn't in the best state of mind. She was dating random men from chat rooms. The Albertsons the girls worked at was only 6 minutes away from Samantha's house. There wasn't really any reason for her to be late. It was very unusual. About 15 or 20 minutes went by, and Terry volunteered to go over to Samantha's to check on her. Terry's husband had just dropped her off at work, so she called him back and said, "Hey, come pick me back up. We need to drive over to Samantha's." So the two of them got to Samantha's house at 1651 Huff Street in Wichita Falls. They parked the car and walked up her porch steps. They got to the screen door, opened it, and knocked. They didn't get an answer, so they decided to check and see if the door was unlocked. and it was. They let themselves inside. Terry and her husband John made their way through the front door and into the living room, looking for Samantha and calling her name. They couldn't find her, so they went upstairs. As soon as Terry entered one of the upstairs bedrooms, she saw something. We can tell when something doesn't look right. We don't have to look long. It only takes a second to realize that something is not natural, that it's not normal, and that something's wrong. From Terry's vantage point, she could see her friend Samantha lying on the floor in a very awkward position. But what really stood out was the blood. The bright red blood against the cream-colored carpet in Samantha's bedroom. There was no question in Terry and John's minds. Samantha was deceased. Terry immediately called 911, and at approximately 9:55 a.m., officers of the Wichita Falls Police Department were dispatched to Samantha's residence. Upon their arrival, officers made contact with Terry and John Perez. Terry immediately let them know that she was a co-worker of Samantha's and that she and her husband had just stumbled upon her body. It was in an upstairs bedroom. One of the first officers on scene happened to be a rookie cop, and his name was Officer White. All he was told was that somebody found a body, so everyone in the department rushed over. The first thing that the officers noticed was that Terry and John looked very upset. They were distraught. They were shocked. Officers had their weapons drawn as they went through the house room by room, clearing it and making sure there were no perpetrators, no criminals, no one dangerous inside that could harm them. They were making their way upstairs, where they were told that Samantha's body could be found. Officer White had never seen a deceased female before. He had never been involved in a case like this, especially something so violent. This was his first time, and it was shocking. It's something that stays with you, whether or not you are a rookie. But I think you will understand the magnitude when I explain what he saw upon entering and encountering Samantha's body. There was no question that this was a homicide. The next step was to establish a crime scene. This is when officers would put up the crime scene tape all around the premises and wait for forensics to arrive. Then the case would be handed over to the detectives and forensic technicians who would walk through the scene, collecting evidence and trying to determine what happened to Samantha. Detective Tony Fox of the Wichita Falls Police Department was assigned as the lead investigator on Samantha's case. No matter how seasoned you are as a detective or an investigator, or even a forensic technician, nothing prepares you for this. We're human beings. When you see another human being lifeless, just taken away, no longer a person because they're a shell of who they once were, without that personality shining through, you know that this is someone's daughter, could be someone's sister, somebody's mother. You have no idea. You can try to be as strong as possible, but you're still human. It's difficult for everyone that was working on this case to see Samantha in the shape that she was in. So this is the scene that Detective Fox walked into, and I'm going to be as detailed as possible so I can give you the best description of everything Detective Fox saw when he walked into that room. But first, I should note that the detectives did a sweep of the first floor of Samantha's house before they went upstairs. And one of the most important things investigators need to do is take pictures of everything the way they saw it. As you can see, I'm going to show you some pictures. Nothing looked amiss in the living room. You can see a couch, there's a bunch of pillows on top of it. Nothing really looks out of place. There's a blanket on the floor, maybe that's what it looks like here. Nothing is knocked over. It doesn't look like any struggle happened here in this area. Then moving further into the living room, you can see one of Samantha's little cats on the table. I got sad when I saw that picture because I know how much she loved her cats. There are a pair of shoes to the left and actually what looks like a bowl of Halloween candy. Do you see that sitting on the coffee table? This looks like an ottoman, maybe covered in a green blanket with some stars on it, followed by her brick fireplace. Nothing to miss here. It looks like everything is very organized. She's got a lot of figurines, memorabilia, and photos up on the wall, and it looks like she's got some stuffed animals on the top of her entertainment console, along with a cat tree to the right as well. Officers didn't find any forced entry on the doors of Samantha's home or the windows. Nothing looked like it had been pried open. The kitchen was clean and organized, dishes were done. I also noticed a People magazine or some kind of awesome magazine there in the kitchen. I just took note of it because I used to read those all the time. The downstairs bathroom off the kitchen looked organized and nothing out of the ordinary there. The stairs themselves didn't have any blood on them and didn't look like anything happened in the downstairs area. Moving up the stairs, but it's when they came to that upstairs bedroom where Samantha was found that they realized that the struggle was contained in that bedroom, and that was going to be their main focus. Right before entering the bedroom, there looked to be a pair of shoes, as well as a spray bottle with water inside, or a substance that's clear and looks like water. You can also see Samantha's glasses in the corner. It looks like there could be another pair of shoes that are black leather shoes. See in the corner of this picture right here, but I can't tell for sure. Just about 1.5 feet from where those shoes are is Samantha's head, and parallel to that is her hand, which is outstretched and bent. Then there's a pool of blood. She was lying on her side, with her head facing the opening of the door and her legs outstretched forward. Her legs were spread apart in a V shape. She was wearing a t-shirt and jeans and white socks. There appeared to be polite smears and black grease on the pant legs of her jeans. Her shirt was either a crop top or it had been pulled up, whether within the struggle or when she fell to her final resting place. So her entire midriff was showing from about the bottom of her breasts all the way down past her navel, going down a little bit above the hip area. And then her jeans covered the rest of her body from the waist all the way down to her ankles. Then she was wearing white socks. The pool of blood began at the top of Samantha's head. It was in the back and went all the way down near her midriff. She was laying on her right side, and the left side of her upper back was against the bottom portion of the bed frame. So she was lying with her right shoulder down on the floor, part of her body propped up against the bed frame, and her waist was twisted to the left. Her legs were sprawled out, like I said, in this really awkward V shape because she was twisted. She wasn't flat against the floor, however, the right side of her head was flat to the floor. Her hair was short at the time, and it was matted to her head because of the blood. The back of her head is where the blood was coming from. This was not a small pool. Like I said, it's a pretty extensive area of the carpet, all the way behind her head, a few inches back, if not a few feet, under the bed, down her back towards her midriff. Her right arm was in an L shape, so it was kind of like that, and her head was parallel to it like this. Her left arm was bent over her waist and just hanging over her body. It looked as though the mattress of the bed had been pushed so that it wasn't even, and matching up with the box spring underneath. And this was probably due to the struggle that ensued. That's about the only thing that looks out of place, besides some smaller items around the room. One thing I did take note of was that Samantha had a lot of sneakers, a lot of Skechers sneakers, throughout her entire house. Hardly any of them looked like they had been completely worn. This might have been due to Christmas presents that she could have received, since Christmas was just a couple of weeks before this happened. She stood all day as a cashier, so it wouldn't be out of the ordinary that people would gift her comfortable shoes. Walking further into the room and closer to Samantha, it is evident that there is some kind of ligature around her neck, and upon closer inspection, detectives realize this is a coaxial cable. You may or may not be familiar with what these are. I'm going to show you on the screen because I'm pretty sure most of you know this is exactly what the one around Samantha's neck looked like. It was either white or beige, some kind of cream color, and it had 2 gold or copper-looking metal ends. Plain and simple. These are electrical cables. They have an inner and an outer portion. They consist of a copper core wire, which is then wrapped in insulation and then covered with woven copper. On top is an outer plastic sheath. They can be used as telephone lines, broadband internet cables, and for high-speed internet connections, any kind of data transmission, cable television, radio transmission, that kind of thing. I think you might recognize the end of these cables, where they usually connect with other connectors. They're very thick cables. They're strong, they're not something that can be easily broken. The cable was long enough to be wrapped multiple times around Samantha's neck, very tightly. From what the detectives could see, it looked like it had been wrapped 3 or 4 times, and then tied in the front at the base of her throat in a square knot. This is a very specific kind of knot you tie in rope. It consists of using two loose ends that are tied together in a very secure manner. After the knot is tied, it leaves the ends sticking out from either side. There are a couple of specific places that individuals can learn to use square knots, or that they would be useful. I grew up living on a sailboat, and I definitely had to learn a square knot, although we called it a reef knot. Another place would be in the military or Boy Scout survival training. It's sometimes referred to as a Hercules knot. It's very strong, and it got its name at least 4,000 years ago when sailors would use it to tie down sails on their ships in strong winds. No pun intended, but using a knot like this in Samantha's circumstances is completely going overboard. It's excessive, and it was done almost for effect, for a show or a symbol, and not for effectiveness. Clearly, Samantha wasn't going to be able to go anywhere in the condition that she was in because she had been struck in the back of the head. Detectives are pretty sure they know what was used to strike Samantha, as crime scene technicians were able to move Samantha to get a full understanding of the extent of her injuries. They were able to see that the injury to her head was very severe, and on the floor right next to her left leg was a fire extinguisher. Now, this isn't a full-size fire extinguisher that you would see in like a building or anything like that. It was a smaller one that you might find in an apartment or a home underneath the sink. When they inspected it, the fire extinguisher had blood and hair on it, and it also seemed to have fingerprints in blood. Compared to a crime that consists of maybe a firearm, something that you know could be done easily and quickly, this took time. This is personal. This was a crime where the perpetrator had to stand face to face with Samantha when they were tying that knot. It was in the front of her. There were also defensive wounds to Samantha's hands, so her hands were hit, possibly with the same item that was used to hit her on the back of the head. Upon further inspection, there were blood droplets that were still wet on the bedspread on top of the bed, which was made and did not look like it was slept in, something that caught detectives' eyes. It stood out. It definitely looked like it was out of place. It also looked like it had been placed there on the bed after Samantha was killed, or at least after the blood droplets had fallen into the bedspread. It was a small gold laser pointer keychain. As you can see from this photo, it is actually laying on top of a blood droplet, but it doesn't appear to have any blood on it, which is very strange. There were no other significant pieces of evidence in this room. However, they did take pictures of the floor around Samantha's body, which included several pairs of shoes, slippers, stuffed animals, as well as her closet, which consisted of clothing and a number of Skechers shoe boxes with several new pairs of shoes inside. The crime scene technicians went ahead and fingerprinted the TV cable that was wrapped around Samantha's neck, the fire extinguisher, and other places around the bedroom, along with collecting blood samples for analysis. Another significant portion of the house where investigators spent a lot of their time collecting evidence was at Samantha's computer desk. It was evident that she spent a lot of time in this area. They even took the computer in for forensic analysis. Now detectives need to step outside of Samantha's house and into her neighborhood to canvass the area and find out if anyone close by saw anything. Meanwhile, Samantha's father was notified and Samantha's mom was on her way to work. Sharon had just barely gotten in the door to her office when Joe called her to tell her to come home quick. He bluntly told her that someone had killed Samantha. Sharon went into complete shock. As advanced as our minds are as human beings, even the human mind can't comprehend something so shocking. She didn't understand the words that she was hearing. Why would anyone want to hurt her daughter? How could it be real? Samantha's mom was never able to come to terms with what happened because a huge piece of her was taken away. She was never the same. I watched a clip of her mom talking about this moment, and I can tell you I don't know what she was like before, but there was just an emptiness about Sharon. Something's missing. It's almost like the reason for Sharon to live isn't there anymore. She knew that she just wasn't there to protect her daughter in those last moments. Samantha was alone, and sometimes as a parent, you can't help but feel like you failed, even though this is not Sharon's fault. Someone else who loved and cared about Samantha also got the news, poor Lisa, and she had to put two and two together herself because she gets a phone call from a friend, and all he said was to turn on the news. When Lisa did, she saw Samantha's house on the screen and the yellow tape around it. She too went into shock. She fell to the floor. She was numb. She could not believe what was going on. Why would anyone want to do something like this? She hadn't even figured out what happened yet, but she knew from the headlines. She knew she had just spoken to Samantha the night before, so she just couldn't comprehend how quickly something like this could occur. You already know Samantha's other close friend, Terry. She was the one who found her. She provides a statement to the police, not only about everything that happened when she entered the premises, but since Terry worked with Samantha, she knew things about her personal life. She told the police everything we already know about her husband, John, how they met, what had happened in their marriage, how it fell apart, the attempt on her life, everything. But she also tells him something we don't know. As much as Samantha kind of wanted John out of her life at this point, there was something that was keeping him in her life. Something that caused them to get into a major argument just 2 weeks earlier. Samantha was trying to tie up some loose ends when it came to everything in their relationship because she was trying to move forward in the process of their whole divorce unfolding. She was taking John off of her health insurance. As I mentioned before, John suffered that severe accident when the car fell on top of him. The medical bills were thousands of dollars. John could not afford them without really good health insurance, which Samantha had. But Samantha didn't think it was fair that he was still receiving benefits when his actions destroyed their marriage. Well, this did not go over well with John. He was irate. He was furious, enraged. Maybe because, according to Samantha, she told her friends that he was yelling in her face, saying that he was screwed. He told Samantha, "There is no way that I'm going to afford those bills." During that argument, Samantha told her friends that he said something to the effect of, "I'm going to take everything away from you." This definitely raised a red flag. This is a volatile relationship. Clearly, John doesn't have a problem hurting Samantha emotionally, so could he have hurt her physically? They have to bring him in for questioning. Meanwhile, they're spreading out to begin to interview Samantha's neighbors. I feel like a broken record because I say it every single time. But it's a part of these investigations. You're going to have the person who is the closest to the victim come in for questioning, and they're usually the number one prime focus in the beginning of these investigations, until otherwise noted. Investigators are looking for anything and everything, actually. They're watching his body language, the tone of his voice, the way that he's reacting to certain questions, and his physical appearance. When John comes in, they're asking him questions, but one of the most vital questions is in regard to what happened in their relationship. He explained that they got separated on July 4th, 2002, but that their relationship was fine. They got along. Detectives press him about the health insurance, and he says, "Yeah, you know what? We got into somewhat of a disagreement, but we figured it out. She wasn't going to take me off of the health insurance." He was adamant that he never yelled at her and didn't threaten her in any way, like her friend said she claimed he did. Maybe she blew it out of proportion, but as he's telling this, the detectives look down at his hands and notice that he's got some small cuts, and that was concerning. They say, "Hey John, what's going on with your hands? How did you get those little scratches?" He says, "Oh, these, I was trying to plug something in behind a table, and my knuckles hit the wall, and the skin kind of just scraped off." That's how he said he got those injuries. I'm going to show it to you on the screen. Here they are. But on top of all that, he gives an alibi. He says that on January 5th, the night of the murder, he was with his girlfriend, Christy. Remember Christy? The one that basically had an affair right in front of Samantha's face in her own home? The one that he's now living with? Christy becomes his alibi witness. I was in there thinking, what if this was some kind of plan? If you were so in love, would you possibly lie for your lover? Of course, there are people who have done that. If you haven't watched the video about Wendy Trebaga, I will put it in the description box. Please watch it after this. I'll put it in the cards too. At the end of this video, love can make you do some crazy things. So, All of this is looking very suspicious to detectives. You've got this man who cheats, he's now living with the girlfriend that he cheated with, he's got cuts on his hands, and friends say that he threatened Samantha because she was going to take him off the health insurance, which would cost him thousands of dollars. Having your new girlfriend as your alibi witness, saying that you guys were just home together that night, is not really good. It's not a concrete alibi. So they asked him for his DNA, and he gives it to them. At this point, as in a lot of other investigations, they can't sit there and waste their time on one individual. They have so many other places that they need to look, people they need to talk to, and they can't hold him right now. They don't have anything for that, so they have to let him go. However, before he walks out of the station, detectives want to know if he can think of anyone that would want to kill his estranged wife. The next thing he says kind of sounds like he's saying it out of jealousy or animosity, because even in this moment, where he just found out that the woman he at least used to love is deceased, he says, "You know what? I told her she needed to stop messing around with those guys online. It's dangerous, it's really risky. She could get tangled up with some dangerous people." Investigators kind of want to know more about this, but John doesn't really have any details. He just says, "Listen, she said she was seeing people, meeting them from online, and that was that." Investigators have a lot they need to check out. His alibi, the DNA, and they need to confirm whether it was true that Samantha was involved with people online. They also think maybe John is just trying to take the attention off of him, since more than one person has pointed their fingers, saying that he could have wanted to hurt Samantha. Terry's husband, John Perez, was in agreement about Terry's statement, and he confirmed that Terry was a good friend of Samantha's, that she knew a lot about Samantha's personal life. In regard to John, he says, "I'm just the husband of one of Samantha's very good friends." But he had been there all along, hearing everything that was going on in Samantha's life. So he confirmed that all of those things had happened, and that everything that Terry said happened when they got to the premises was also correct. Moving on, while canvassing Samantha's neighborhood, investigators did uncover somewhat of a treasure trove when it came to very detailed information about everyone who was coming and going in that area. That is because one of the guys who lives in the neighborhood was part of the neighborhood watch program. This man had pads upon pads upon pads of paper where he would just write down every single vehicle that went up and down the street. The make, model, color, tag numbers, you name it, this man had a record of it. I don't know how long he had been doing this, but he took his job very seriously, and he doesn't hesitate to provide all of this information to investigators, because that's what the neighborhood watch is for. He's probably thinking, "See, I was doing my job, and it was worth it." Detectives wouldn't have been able to have that much detailed information otherwise. Another neighbor said that she wasn't sure about the vehicles, but she did remember men coming in and out of Samantha's house. She obviously didn't have her record or anything to give to the investigators, but they do jot down her name, just in case they have any more questions later on. When they were about to leave, one of the children from the neighborhood came forward. It was a 12-year-old young man, and he said he saw a motorcycle that was coming and going around Samantha's house. He also said that the motorcycle was red and black. At this point, investigators don't have a cause of death or a time of death, so they're not even sure when to ask neighbors if they heard or saw anything. But none of them reported anything peculiar or out of the ordinary within the last couple of days. It's time to put together a timeline of Samantha's last few days, so the investigators turn to the people who know her best, starting with her mother. Even though Samantha's parents and loved ones are in deep despair and shock, they realize that providing as much information as soon as possible can help find her killer. So, through their sadness, they meet with investigators who try to piece together her very last days. Sharon says she spoke to Samantha 3 or 4 times on January 5th. In the morning, Samantha said she had plans to hang out with her boyfriend Chris and go to a tattoo shop. The last time she spoke to her was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and everything was fine as far as Sharon knew. Samantha planned to hang out with Chris. He was going to come over in the morning, and they were going to go to the tattoo shop and spend the day together. But that's all she really knew. Investigators wanted to know if she knew more about this Chris person, and Sharon explains, "Well, I know that they met online, and she said he's really nice. She really liked him. He was sweet, he was fun to be around, and they were seeing more and more of each other." Investigators have done this long enough to know that children, even if they're adult children, don't always tell their parents everything about their lives, especially their dating life. They're more likely to tell their friends about those aspects of their lives. So investigators want to confirm this information with one of the friends that is the closest to Samantha, and that's Lisa. Lisa explains that she was very apprehensive about Samantha meeting guys online, but Samantha would say it's no different than meeting a guy at a bar. Everyone's a stranger before you meet them. Lisa also told investigators Samantha shared John's concern about the fact that she was meeting guys in chat rooms. He had the same outlook that Lisa did, that it was a little weird and that she should be careful. But Samantha was adamant. It's not weird, it's not even random, it's just a different way to connect with people that you don't know. What do you think? I'm just curious. One of her closest friends, her mother, and even her soon-to-be ex-husband are all concerned for her safety, but she wouldn't listen to any of them. She also wouldn't give them much information because she thought they would be judging her about her choices. She held back a little bit. She didn't let them know exactly what was going on, but investigators were about to find out. However, Lisa does say that Chris is not just one of her random guys she's talking to, that it was getting serious. She started to refer to Chris as her boyfriend. Like her mom said, Lisa went on to say that she spoke to Samantha on the evening of January 5th, and Chris was at Samantha's house. They asked her how she knew that, and she said she could hear a guy in the background. Lisa had just gifted Samantha a DVD set of the latest season of Friends. Samantha told Lisa the night that she was going to watch it with Chris, and that she would call her the next day. That's the last time Lisa ever talked to her. Investigators want to know how well Lisa knew Chris. She says, "I don't know Chris, I've never met Chris. All she knew was that it seemed like Samantha was really into him and that they were hanging out a lot." The last phone call Samantha had was with Lisa at 6 p.m., and that's the last time anyone had contact with Samantha. However, they get some information from one of Samantha's guy friends. His name is Zach Adams. He indicated that he attempted to contact her on both her home phone and her cell phone at approximately 9:30 p.m. on Sunday. Zach stated that he received no answer from either one of those phones. Investigators are not sure how or where to begin. The internet is still a very confusing and vast place for all of us. I would say it's even more confusing now than it was in 2003. Why? Because nowadays, so much can be faked. People can catfish one another. A lot of people are just hiding behind anonymous profiles. But Yahoo Messenger had only been created in 1998. So we're talking this was the dawn of all of this technology. Chat rooms, people talking to anonymous individuals without faces or, names that don't really match. It's very uncharted territory for investigators. They had Samantha's computer. They knew she was using Yahoo Messenger to communicate with various individuals. But what is it that these services save? What kind of information? Because I can tell you, even now, it takes months to subpoena a company like Instagram or Twitter for various DMs or information about users. It's a lengthy process, and not all the information we want is readily available at our fingertips. A lot of times there's an extremely dense amount of data you have to go through to find what you're looking for. And they didn't even know what they were looking for back then or where to start. What they can do is turn on Samantha's computer, go to Yahoo Messenger, and try to see who was in her contact list. Back then, you sort of had an address book. You had your favorites, you had your friends list, if you will, and possibly some chat history. The first place investigators went was to her internet history. Where had she been? What websites had she been frequenting? And that's how they actually found out it was Yahoo Messenger that was her service of choice. The next thing that they were able to determine is that Samantha's username was MeowMix28, and Lisa confirmed this. Once they figured this out, they realized they stumbled upon hundreds of conversations and exchanges between Samantha on her username and various people going back months. It was literally worse than trying to find a needle in a haystack, because this haystack almost never ends. Detectives do have the ability to go back through her chat history, so they come to find out Samantha was really sad, and it seemed like talking to people in these chat rooms and on Messenger was bringing up her spirit. People were giving her attention, and her confidence was being boosted. But they noticed something else. A lot of these conversations were very sexually charged. There were so many messages that investigators think it could take months to sift through. Plus, no one is showcasing their real name, of course not. They're just all kinds of usernames like Samantha's. They believe their best bet is to work forward to backward, starting with any individual who she chatted with in the days before her murder, and then work backward all the way to the beginning of her chat history, focusing on anyone with the name Chris. When they're sifting through all of these chats, investigators pinpoint a conversation from January 1st, which was just 4 days before her murder. The actual messages were never publicly released, but the context of the messages was insinuated through different stories and research that I've done. There were some very troubling things in this conversation in question because of how sexual it was, and not only that, because of what investigators perceived as this person being really persistent to a point of being demanding and scary. But before they even went into the conversation, what caught their eye was the username CP238. The fact that the username started with a C led them to believe this could be the Chris that they're looking for. The conversation started out pretty normal. They asked Samantha what she was going to be doing that night, and she let him know. But then he said something along the lines of, "Well, are you planning to be naked during any of those activities, or any time in between?" It seemed like Samantha was trying to be nice and kind of go along with it, but he was also asking questions like, "Do you live by yourself?" Investigators thought that that was very suspicious. Why would a person need to know whether she lived alone or not? Not only that, he goes on to blatantly say, "Tell me where you live." He was even asking for her exact address, and he did this numerous times throughout this conversation. That's when Samantha actually says to him, "You could be a serial killer." Too bad that doesn't stop her from giving him her address. It seems as though the conversation was playful, but this could be a manipulation tactic. This is also the first time investigators were kind of shocked to see a totally different side to Samantha. I mean, they don't know Samantha, but from what they've been told, she grew up in a small town, and she's only been married to one man for the last 8 years, with him for 13. High school sweethearts. They were just taken aback because they were under the impression she was just a little more innocent sexually. I guess it doesn't matter. The point is, the conversation goes into a very straightforward exchange about role-playing, being submissive, and, one person being the master, one person being the slave. He's asking her if she's kinky or not, and she's teasing him. They're going back and forth. Eventually, it gets into a bunch of fantasies that they want to play out. Investigators are continuing to confirm the information they're finding with Lisa. Does this sound like something that Samantha would be talking about? And Lisa's like, "I don't know. I don't know everything about my friend, but listen, she could just want to experiment, open herself up, maybe do things that her and her husband had never done before. She's an adult. It seems like she's just having fun. But however, not everything is just fun and games. The decision to give someone you don't know and have never seen before and can't background check the address to your house could lead to devastating consequences." CP238 is at the top of investigators' list of potential suspects, and now they have to figure out who this person is. Oh wait, do you remember the neighbor who was obsessed with writing things down on pads and pads of paper, descriptions of cars, things like that? Well, investigators go back to that evidence book and they start going through it, and they stop at January 1st. Wait until you hear this, because I am sure detectives were having one of those aha moments piecing this all together. Because on January 1st, the neighborhood watch log had a handwritten description of a 1996 Mercedes-Benz with California license plates parked at Samantha's house. The investigators run the plates, and it turns out the vehicle belongs to a man named Kristopher Porter. They cannot believe this. They're like, "Okay, we're on the right track. We've got to bring this guy in." So they dig into his background, and guess what they find out? He's a 22-year-old Air Force lieutenant, stationed nearby. Immediately, they make the connection with the square knot and the military. He could have gained that knowledge, and also how convenient is it that this man is in the military? He probably travels to different cities, different states, all around the country and beyond. And he could be utilizing these chat rooms, speaking with women, and even going into them so he could find them nearby. Because they didn't have Tinder, maybe he would go to one that said like Wichita Falls, and then track them down and do them harm. So they have to find him. Luckily, it wasn't hard considering he is in the military, and they waste no time. They don't waste any time. They tell him what's going on and what happened to Samantha. They said, "You were at the victim's house on January 1st. Who is she to you, and what were you doing there?" They wanted details, so he fills them in. He says, "Yeah, I'm CP-238. I met Samantha in a chat room. We talked, we were in private messages." But he tells them something else. Remember, they asked for details? Well, he's going to give them details. He says that Samantha gave him her phone number. He was on his way from work, and he called her up because he knew her address. He was close by, and he gave her some commands to carry out. He said he was going to come over and wanted her to answer the door in nothing but a blindfold. They're like, "This is it. This is the Chris. This is who she was with. This is who her friend heard on the phone. So we're going to get this guy. We're not going to let him get away." Now they're like, "You don't even know this person? You're going to tell them to blindfold themselves and come answer their front door? What is this? What kind of game is this?" He explains it's a role-playing thing. She consented. She wanted to do it. I get that, but I'm sure investigators are thinking the same thing I am. You don't even know who you're going to meet when you open the door, and neither did Samantha. She's blindfolded, and that's really convenient if someone was trying to do someone harm. If they come and tell them to be blindfolded, they can't even see who it is. Christian is just trying to explain it from his point of view. This is just something they normally do. It's just kinky role play, you know? She was my submissive, I was the master. We had our sexual encounter, and then I left. That was it. Sort of like a Tinder date, you know? They were both going on there looking for the same thing, this one thing. Once they had their exchange, they went their separate ways. That's it. So they asked him, "Okay, are you sure you haven't seen her after that? Because that was January 1st, not the 5th, remember? Or the 6th. And he's like, "No, I never saw her after that, and I have an alibi. I was at the batting cages with my friends, and they can vouch for me." Now, just so you know, the autopsy report hadn't come back yet, and I'm going to get into that in one moment. They don't know whether Samantha was killed on the night of the 5th or the early morning of the 6th, but all of this is just too much of a coincidence. How do you get a guy CP2, his name is Christian, Chris, and they know for a fact, she told her family, she was dating a guy named Chris. Once again, they're back with Lisa asking her about Christian, trying to find out whether Smith ever said that Chris was short for the name Christian or something like that. But Lisa kept reiterating I don't know, I've never seen him. We're not friends. They didn't want me to meet him yet. They wanted to get to know each other better, and then, Samantha was going to slowly introduce all of us to him. Christian's alibi checks out. Then, he provides his DNA sample, and it's a waiting game. But now, Lisa is 100% convinced that the killer was someone that Samantha met online. She just had a gut feeling, and she shared that with investigators. Yes, feelings are just feelings, but after racking her brain over and over again, she couldn't think of anyone in real life that they knew who would want to do her harm. They had to let Christian go at that point because they didn't have anything to hold him on. So now they go back through all of Samantha's other conversations, and then they get a call from Lisa again. Lisa tells investigators she thinks she might know who killed Samantha, and it's not Christian. Well, that's a surprise. Lisa has been doing her own investigation, so she's been going through all of their messages, every message they exchanged, their emails. She's trying to remember their phone calls, and she pieced some information together. She remembered something, and by the way, when I was researching this case, I kept thinking, I am so glad I have a best friend. Thank you, Courtney, for being there, for being my confidant. Because if anything were to ever happen to any of us, it's good that we're sharing details with someone. It sounds morbid. I wouldn't want anything to happen to me, or nothing like that. But it's good to let people know what you're doing and what's going on. Sometimes we're apprehensive about sharing things, but I truly believe there should be at least one or a few people in your life that you share with, that you're honest with and open with, even if it's a therapist, just to have some kind of record. Lisa dug up an email that Samantha sent her, where she was telling her she was scared of a guy that she was seeing. She met him in a chat room. She forwarded these messages, calling him a stalker. Lisa looked at the messages, and she agreed they were really odd. Apparently, Samantha and this guy had hooked up a few times, and they had sort of an ongoing relationship in the fall, between somewhere around August and September, and I think it ended in October. Then she tried to break it off, but this guy wasn't having it. He wouldn't take no for an answer. Samantha said that he would be outside. She would look out the window, and his car would be sitting in her driveway. He would stop by without even telling her he was coming over, and it made her really uncomfortable. Anytime she would tell him she was busy and couldn't hang out, he would not leave. He would call her non-stop, just leaving her all kinds of emails and calling her on both of her phones. She had had enough of it. She just wanted him to stop bothering her. She was getting worried. Lisa also tells investigators that his real name is Charles Kent, but his username is Death Metal 1969. Armed with this information, investigators go back and sift through all of Samantha's conversations between the two of them, and they start to see a pattern, the pattern that Lisa warned them about. At first, Samantha and Charles would just talk about everyday things, and then they would talk about meeting up for sex and then having sex. It was casual, but it seemed like, even though casual, it developed into a more frequent but casual relationship. It's also apparent, because of the messages, that Samantha was ready to call it quits, and Charles wanted more. Investigators found messages from Charles that would say things like, "Oh, I was just thinking about stopping by 10 minutes ago." And Samantha would say, "Good thing you didn't." It was obvious. It would have been obvious to most of us that she wasn't interested anymore. Finally, about 2 months ago, Samantha was able to get through to him, and how she did it was she just told him she was seeing other people. But that's all it takes for someone to become enraged and do something completely crazy. Rejection does not go over well with a lot of people, so investigators use this information and decide to run his name through the DMV, and they get a hit with his address. They take this information and make a little trip to Charles's house to see what's up with him. They asked him what he was doing on January 5th, and he says he was home all day on his computer. Well, that's kind of suspicious. They do get permission to actually confiscate his computer, and they collect his DNA and his fingerprints to compare to the evidence that was found at the crime scene. Now they have 3 possible persons of interest to look into. They have Christian, they have John, the ex-husband, and now they have Charles. They just have to wait on those DNA results. Something that made Charles look even more suspicious was the way he reacted when he found out that Samantha was dead. He was just nonchalantly answering the questions. He didn't even seem to care that somebody he was close to had been murdered. They can't just arrest him with no further evidence, though, even though that alibi was really crappy. Meanwhile, I did tell you that I wanted to talk about the autopsy report. The autopsy report came back. It was a homicide, with the cause of death being strangulation. The report also indicated significant blunt force trauma to the back of Samantha's head. The medical examiner believes that the perpetrator definitely used their hands to initiate the asphyxiation, because there were marks that indicated that. But then they took the cable and tied it around Samantha's throat and made that knot. Interestingly, they did not find any indications of forced intercourse. So the murder weapon in this case was the cable and the fire extinguisher, and both of them were tested for DNA and fingerprints. As it turns out, both of them had not only Samantha's DNA on them, but also unknown DNA from who detectives believe would be the killer. Plus, get this. This was huge! There were fingerprints on both the cable and the fire extinguisher, and both of them were tested for DNA and fingerprints. As it turns out, both of them had not only Samantha's DNA on them, but also unknown DNA from whom detectives believe would be the killer. Plus, get this. This was huge. There were fingerprints on both the cable and the fire extinguisher. Because they have fingerprints, They can go back to the men they already interviewed, got their information from, and compare their fingerprints to those found on the actual murder weapon. This was easy. All they had to do was a simple comparison, and they would know whether one of those men was there that night. While they were tracking down that information for analysis, Samantha's funeral was underway. Her funeral was beautiful. It was big, which surprised me coming from a small town. So many people came out to pay their respects. The entire place was packed. It was full of people who loved and cared about her so much. No parent should ever have to say goodbye to their child like that, especially under such violent circumstances. It's unbelievable, and Sharon could not cope. She couldn't even have pictures of Samantha up around the house, and she was never truly the same. A funeral is, of course, to pay our respects to the victim, to the person who is deceased, who lost their life. But a funeral is also a place where people can come and give their condolences to that person's loved ones, to care for and support the family left behind, because those are the ones who are truly feeling this pain. The pain that Samantha felt in her last moments is incomprehensible, but the pain of those left behind, who have to live every single day without their loved one, can be unbearable. And that's why a lot of people came to the funeral. Some of them didn't even know Samantha. They just had compassion and understanding for her family. They thought about what they would want others to do if this were them. At this point, everyone just wants justice for Samantha. And that's why there was a lot of hope in this moment. Because of those fingerprints, they were going to find her killer. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Unbelievably, and to the surprise of all the detectives, none of the men had matching fingerprints to the ones found at the crime scene. They just laid Samantha to rest, but she can't be at peace. The case may be closed, and she's beneath the earth, but this case is nowhere near being closed, and secrets are still buried. Secrets from what happened, secrets as to why Samantha found herself in a fatal situation. Detectives are working harder than ever to figure out what direction they should even go in next. So, they go back to Samantha's friends, begging for more information, and that's when they noticed Lisa became a little apprehensive. She now realizes none of the people they thought were suspects had anything to do with the crime. As far as they knew, they didn't match. Lisa wouldn't be hiding something, would she? Is there a reason why Lisa would hide something from investigators? Well, kind of. Samantha had a secret, and Lisa knew about it. It might have been a secret that Lisa would take to her own grave. However, this is a grave situation. She knew she had to come clean. There was someone else that Samantha was involved with. Someone that no one knew about, only Lisa. Somebody that she thought she could rule out, but now, after none of the suspects or persons of interest matched the DNA at the crime scene, Lisa felt she had no other choice but to be honest about her best friend and the affair that Samantha was carrying on with a married man. This next part was shocking to me. It also made me mad, sad, concerned, and infuriated. There were a bunch of emotions going through me when I heard what you are about to hear. I don't know what you're going to think. Everyone has different thoughts and opinions on these things. Leave it in the comments if you want to have a conversation and a discussion, but it's not good. Lisa tells detectives that Samantha had an affair with Terry's husband, John. Remember Terry and John, the couple that stumbled upon Samantha's lifeless body? Things are starting to look way more suspicious now. The man they interviewed when they found Samantha deceased was a man she was having an affair with. What is going on, and why didn't John tell them that information? That's not okay. And I'm not just talking about the affair. It's not okay to withhold information about the fact that you had more than a friendship with a woman who was just found dead. At the time, they had no reason to take John's DNA or fingerprints, because according to Terry, she was just really good friends with Samantha, and John was just her husband. And that's all she wrote. I'm just the husband driving my wife over here to her friend's house. We just found her dead, never mentioning anything else. Well, investigators are not okay with this. They track him down immediately, and they're not happy. They want to know why he lied, because omitting information is still lying. Detectives don't hesitate. They confront him right away. Why lie? Why didn't you tell us you were sleeping with Samantha? He says, okay, yes, it's true, we had an affair. It was short though. It was intense, but it was short. Okay, John, but why didn't you tell us about this? And that's when he's like, please, 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 I didn't want my wife to find out. And you know what he said? He didn't want his wife to find out because she wouldn't be happy. Well, yeah, John, your wife's not going to be happy knowing that you cheated on her. And he was just as desperate with these investigators. He was begging them, please don't tell my wife. They're looking at him like he might be the reason that Samantha's dead. Was Samantha going to tell Terry what was going on, considering Samantha's own best friend broke up her marriage with her own husband? Now Terry's husband, John, is having an affair with Samantha. They're starting to think maybe John killed Samantha so that his wife Terry would never find out. When he was asking the detectives to keep his little secrets, they were laughing at him. No, John, they're not your friends. They're not going to stop you from getting in trouble with your wife. They're here to find out who killed Samantha. That's it. He insists he has nothing to do with anything that happened to Samantha. I did not hurt her, and I have nothing to do with her murder. And he's still begging them, please do not tell Terry. So pathetic. That was definitely unexpected. Detectives get his DNA and fingerprints, and then they just have to wait. But now they go back to those logs from the neighborhood watch. They're trying to see if there are any other vehicles that would match the description of the vehicle that John or his wife Terry drove, because they can't rule Terry out. Maybe she has something to do with it. Everyone has to be tested. Their DNA, their fingerprints, they're all in the database now. But it takes weeks for those results to come back. That's when police remember the motorcycle. They had been looking into cars and whatnot, but they hadn't really focused on the motorcycle that the 12-year-old had talked about seeing in the neighborhood. Maybe because they heard that from a 12-year-old. Nevertheless, they decided they need to go question said 12-year-old and ask for a little more information. While they're there in the neighborhood, they kind of go back around to Samantha's immediate neighbors and just say, hey, did you think of anything else? Can you remember anything from the night of the crime or the day before? Crazy enough, one of the neighbors, Kathy, comes forward and says, I saw a blonde guy. It was right before 6 p.m. He drove up on a motorcycle. That may be why they remembered more information, because they were asked specific questions about the motorcycle. Kathy said Samantha and this guy actually got out of Samantha's pickup truck around 4:50 p.m., and then they went inside Samantha's house. Another neighbor, Rebecca, said that she actually spoke to Samantha outside that day and she saw the guy. She said, oh, who's that? And Samantha said, oh, that's my boyfriend. And Rebecca said, yeah, he was driving a motorcycle. And that motorcycle stayed there until Rebecca left for church, which was approximately 6 p.m. Later, when Rebecca came home from church around 8:10 p.m., the motorcycle was gone. Now, remember Samantha's friend Zach? He said he called her around 9:30 on both of her phones and got no answer. So now they think that something could have happened between 6 p.m. when Rebecca left and when Rebecca returned. Here's why. When Rebecca came home from church, she noticed that there were no lights on at Samantha's house. Rebecca lived right next door, and she knew that Samantha turned her porch light on every night due to the neighborhood watch program, so it concerned Rebecca. However, she had to wake up early the next morning, so she didn't really give it much thought and went to bed. The next morning, Rebecca got up around 5:10 and noticed that Samantha's porch light was still off, and it didn't seem like anything had changed from the night before. That's the morning that Samantha was found. Things are about to heat up again. The forensics unit goes through the computer and types in the word motorcycle, hoping that one of the men Samantha was chatting with might have mentioned that he had a motorcycle. Sure enough, one of the chats has the word motorcycle in it, and it's a conversation between Samantha and the username I am Elliot. It's time for them to dig into these chats. Now, these ones were not as sexual in nature. They weren't weird. They weren't odd. They were just everyday conversations. They talked about music, pets, hobbies, and tattoos. It seemed like they both liked tattoos, and they could see that Samantha had met him for the first time just weeks before her death. They knew that she met him in person because the conversation said, I had a lot of fun with you last night. I am Elliot seemed like a gentleman. He even offered to bring Samantha some lunch one day. However, they can't seem to find out any clues to his identity. They just have a username, and it seems like I am Elliot and Samantha had quite a few things in common. They had both just gotten out of relationships and were looking for companionship. Apparently, since they both liked tattoos, they had planned to go to a tattoo shop together. Investigators recall Sharon saying that Samantha was planning on visiting a tattoo shop with Chris on January 5th. So now they go door to door to visit local shops, hoping that they could gather information about that outing. Sure enough, they get a hit at a place called Southern Star Tattoo and Piercing Studio. It turns out Samantha was there on Sunday at 3:15 p.m. with a blonde guy, and they drove up in Samantha's pickup truck. So they have a blonde guy that was at her house on January 5th. She calls him her boyfriend. She tells her mom she's going to hang out with a guy named Chris at the tattoo shop. The boyfriend has a red and black motorcycle. I Am Elliot has a motorcycle. I Am Elliot and her plan to go to a tattoo shop. She goes to the tattoo shop, and who should she go with? A blonde guy. So, what does I Am Elliot look like? Well, we're about to find out. And it's all because of photography. But not a photo of I Am Elliot, not yet. But because he was helping Samantha with photography, she'd been taking some photos, and he tells her, "You should bring them into Metro." Metro was the name of a local photo developing center in Kids. This was before digital cameras, or at least we were still using film. She was still using film, and she needed to get it developed. He wasn't just giving her advice on where to go, it turns out he worked there. Metro is close by, so police are ready to go. They go straight to Metro Photography, and what do they see outside? A red and black motorcycle. So they run the plates, and what happens when they do? They find that the motorcycle is registered to a Kristopher Russell, Christopher with a K, not a C. So, that's why the CP238 username didn't really work out for them, because this Christopher spells his name with a K, not a C. The motorcycle license was from Nebraska. However, when they're looking at records from the tattoo shop, apparently both Chris and Samantha had to leave their information, including their telephone numbers. So they run the number given by Chris, and it's returned to a Kyle Russell with the address of 3814 Stonegate Drive. Christopher's middle name is Kyle, Kristopher Kyle Russell. So they figured that Kyle is Christopher's father. When Kristopher was talking to Samantha, telling her, "I just moved back to Texas," now they understand he moved from Nebraska and is probably living with his parents. So they decided to go ahead and pull up Christopher's Nebraska driver's license photo. Can you guess what color hair Kristopher has? Blonde, of course. But they needed something else. They needed Kristopher's fingerprints. Because remember, when they have the prints, they can get the match. So the FBI helps them to obtain Kristopher's fingerprints. I love when things are coming together. They take his driver's license photo and bring it to Southern Star Tattoo and Piercing Studio, where Jeff Miller was an employee. He was able to identify the person who came into the tattoo shop on that day, on January 5th, with Samantha, as the same person in the photo. They have to cover all bases. They have to connect everything. They're about to try to arrest the man for murder. Whenever things are coming together like this, I can imagine the rush of adrenaline that these investigators must get while they're piecing everything together, because it's becoming more and more apparent that Kristopher Russell is probably their guy, and they have to find out where he is, and fast. It's always a race against time. And since Kristopher was from Nebraska, they want to find out who he was and what he was doing in Nebraska before he came back to Texas. So they do a background check. They find out Kristopher is married, that's right, to a woman named Tara. It gets worse. Unbelievably worse, because Kristopher said he just got out of a relationship when he was talking to Samantha on Yahoo Messenger. That's something they had in common. They were getting over the loss of their significant other. Well, Chris's loss was a little bit different than Samantha's. Kristopher's wife was dead. That's right, she died, and Samantha's dead. Kristopher Russell was a widow. Now the conversation is making even more sense. They go back and check the chat. Yeah, he's getting over the loss of his wife. Wouldn't that mean she died recently? I mean, I know it can take a very long time. Maybe you'll never get over the loss of a loved one. There's no time frame to put on that. But this just becomes suspicious because it turns out Tara died 2 months to the day before Samantha. To the day. Tara was found dead November 6th, and just 2 months later on January 6th, Samantha is found dead. Wait, because there's more. And you're not going to believe this. It gave me the chills. Tara and Samantha have the exact same birthday, just 1 year apart. They were both born on May 13th. Tara was born on May 13th, 1973, and Samantha was born on May 13th, 1974. What is going on? Not only that, when they pull up pictures of Tara, they find out she bears a striking resemblance to Samantha. They both have brown hair, they both have brown eyes, and a number of tattoos. Samantha had tattoos on her left arm, 2 dragons on her left leg, a heart on her upper chest, in loving memory on her left forearm. As for Tara, she had hearts on her left breast, her left buttocks, and her left leg, as well as flowers around her right wrist and her left ankle, and a bear on her left leg. Not only that, both of these women met Kristopher on the internet. Detectives are shocked, so they decide to reach out to the police department in the town where Tara died, and that agency tells detectives that Tara's death was suspicious. And you know, I would never try to take away attention from Samantha in this story, but we have to stop for a moment and talk about Tara, because the first thing detectives want to know is, how did Tara die? Tara Russell was from Chadron, Texas, and she graduated high school in 1991. Then she served 6 years in the Navy as a nurse. She and Kristopher had just moved to Chadron in March of 2002, and like I said, they met online and were married a few months later, on November 28, 2001. They had been married less than a year when Tara was found dead. I had so many questions, so I dug up newspaper clippings because I had to understand what happened to Tara. On the morning of her death, Tara was brought back to her house around 2 o'clock in the morning by her friend Renee. Now, according to Tara's mom Donna, Kristopher was at home waiting for Tara to arrive. They were alone. He actually came out and helped her get into the house because she had been out, having a good time that night. Her friend Renee, who dropped her off, actually used to live with Tara and Kristopher for 7 months. She had just moved out a week before Tara was found dead. Tara and Renee had been out that night, and there was nothing wrong with Tara. According to Renee, she wasn't sick. She didn't have a fever, a cold, or an infection of any kind. They were just having fun together. However, the next morning, Kristopher told police he found Tara's body on the living room floor, dead. At the time of her death, a forensic pathologist determined the cause of Tara's death was pneumonia. But get this, Kristopher insisted that Tara be cremated, and he had that power as her husband. He could make that decision. Just a few weeks later, he was packing up a U-Haul, and police went by there and were like, "Hey, buddy, where are you going?" He explained, "Well, my wife died, and I'm going back to live with my parents in Texas." That's when they asked him to go for a polygraph, and he agreed, saying, "Yeah, okay, I'll take one." But he never showed up, and he left town. He was gone just a few hours after police came by. Tara's mom said she wasn't sick, there was nothing wrong with her daughter, she had no underlying health conditions. So all of this is looking really, really bad. Kristopher Russell could be a potential serial killer. Was he planning to do this again? Did he kill Tara? Investigators had to find him. With all this information and evidence, a judge issued a search warrant, and they brought Chris down to the station. They collected his fingerprints and DNA, but he never said a word. He wouldn't even give them a statement. Nothing. That search warrant included access to his parents' residence where he was living, and that's where they found a few things that definitely connected him to the crime scene. The first was a book on knots. I'm not kidding, and no pun intended. He had a book on how to create different knots, and in that book was the square knot, the one that was used around Samantha's neck. They found coax cables and laser pointers in his closet, the same kind of laser pointer that was found on Samantha's bed. This man is strange. He collects laser pointers and has a book about knots. What is he doing? Well, what he's not doing is talking to police. But it doesn't matter because guess what? He doesn't have to say a word. His DNA speaks for itself. That's right, they matched his DNA and fingerprints to the crime scene. They were all over the cable and the fire extinguisher. They caught their killer. On February 20th, 2003, they arrested Kristopher Kyle Russell for the murder of Samantha Lezark. Chris was 21 years old. He was a student at Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls. And guess what? He was studying criminal justice. It's like he was trying to learn the things he was going to use to hurt people, and that's sick. This man came from a good home. He looks just like a clean-cut, all-American boy. His family was well respected within their community. They were members of a big church in the town. He had been in the Marines, but guess what? He left. They sent him home in less than a week, and that is a huge red flag. I've said this before, but looks can be deceiving. You know that there was something wrong with Kristopher Russell. They searched his bedroom and found a picture that they initially thought was of Samantha, but it turned out to be Tara. That's how much these women looked alike. They were also able to confiscate Kristopher's computer and confirm that he was the person behind the username I am Elliot. Not only that, but he was dating another woman from Wichita Falls. He had a girlfriend. He probably would have done this again because he thought he got away with murder at least. But what about Tara? He pleaded not guilty to Samantha's murder, and in Nebraska they were reopening the case involving Tara's death. They might not have her body anymore, but luckily the forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy took tissue samples, blood samples, and photographs. There were marks on Tara's neck, and her mom felt so bad because she was just like, if you wouldn't have let him go, Samantha wouldn't be dead. Here's what prosecutors said happened when they went to trial. Their theory was that Samantha and Kristopher were dating. Chris came over to spend time with Samantha that day. It was a normal day. They also believed that the laser pointer was a gift to Samantha for her cats, because you know how cats play with those little laser pointers, and that he gave it to her to build rapport, to gain her trust. Why would he have more than one, though? There's something else I don't really believe as far as what their theory is, but who am I? I don't know. They said that they thought something happened to cause Chris to go into a rage, but I think he planned this all along. I don't think he was triggered by anything. I think he was looking for the perfect opportunity. If he killed Tara, the perfect opportunity was right when Renee moved out. And with Samantha, the perfect opportunity was finding a beautiful, vulnerable woman who just got out of a relationship and was trusting of a man that she met online. She reminded him so much of his last victim. If it's true that he did anything to Tara, in my opinion, he killed her. They said that he ripped that cable out from behind the TV. We know they were planning on watching the DVD of Friends. So maybe they were just sitting in that area, watching TV in her bedroom, and they were just close by, and he just grabbed that cable because it was there. But he also had those cables at his house and the laser pointers. I think it was planned. It's kind of morbid that these kinds of cables can be used for the internet and things like that. And they met on the internet. I don't know, it's just really strange. But the fact that there was no indication of forced intercourse leads me to believe that he just knew he was going to do this all along, and then he came there for one reason. After a quick deliberation, the jury found Kristopher Russell guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to the maximum 99 years in prison. It was a relief to have someone like him off the streets, someone who at first glance looks like a really nice guy, someone that goes to church, goes to college, and seems to be bettering himself. But it's really not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside that counts. And it's sad because on the inside, Samantha had a loving, caring heart, and she was loved by so many people around her. I don't know how someone can do what Kristopher did, but I'm glad that he can't do it to anyone else. 29-year-old Ben Rennick had it all. Money, fame, a career that he loved, and an adorable family. But one tragic afternoon, he was found dead in his workplace, surrounded by snakes. No one knew the dark secrets that were about to be uncovered, but what was obvious was that this was a cold-blooded killing. So buckle up as I tell you about Benjamin Blue Britt Rennick, a world-famous snake breeder who sadly passed away in 2017. But first, I need to take you all the way back to 1950, when Ben's father was born. Frank James Rennick was raised in Rolla, Missouri, a southern city with a population of about 12,000 people. Frank's grandparents and parents were all in the pet food manufacturing industry, and Frank grew up wanting to follow in his family's footsteps and become a successful businessman. When he was in his 20s, he moved out of the house and got married to a woman named Nancy. He was determined to establish himself on his own. But in your 20s, it can be quite a roller coaster. Frank's career was going great, but his marriage wasn't, and soon they separated. Frank was running Bow Wow Dog Food Company, a pet food manufacturing company, and that's when he met Charlene Marie Keenans. Charlene actually went by Kim with friends, and she was 2 years younger than Frank. She loved animals, kids, traveling, getting drinks with friends, and doing some interior decorating. Kim and Frank ended up getting married on August 18th, 1980, in Las Vegas, and I bet that was a blast. They returned to Missouri and started planning a family together. Frank eventually sold his company, Bow Wow Dog Food, to ConAgra. With that money, he was able to move out to the country, start a new business, and provide for his growing family. The Rennicks moved to a small town 2 hours north with a population of only 700 people, New Florence in Montgomery County, Missouri. It's about an hour and 15-minute drive from the center of St. Louis, and it's so small that it doesn't even have a hospital. This area is known for its farming, wine and spirit tasting, and families living on huge plots of farmland, staying there for generations. Frank and Kim lived in a large farmhouse on a 72-acre property that bordered the Danville Conservation Area. Kim gave birth to their first son, Samuel Bryant Kimish Rennick, in the mid-80s. He was outgoing, fun-loving, a little bit brash, and the most adorable mix of Kim and Frank. Not too long after, Kim was pregnant again, this time with baby Ben. Benjamin Blue Britt Rennick was welcomed into the world on August 4th. Benjamin Blue Britt Rennick was welcomed into the world on August 4th, 1987, in a St. Louis hospital. He was a quiet kid, growing up on the farm, surrounded by nature. The first few years of Ben's life were magical. He and Sam had daily adventures around the property, playing hide-and-seek, finding buried treasure, fishing in the pond, and collecting insects. Even then, as just a 4-year-old, Ben loved animals. He liked lizards and turtles, and he loved snakes. Ben was begging his family for a pet snake, and Kim told him that when he was old enough and a little more responsible, they would take him to the pet store, and he could pick out any animal he wanted. I mean, they lived on a farm, but it wasn't paradise forever, because in September of 1992, tragedy struck the family, the first of a long series of unfortunate events. While the Rennicks were visiting friends in St. Louis, a huge, and I mean huge, gas explosion occurred in their farmhouse. The gas plugs had been removed from a gas line, causing it to malfunction. I don't know anything about gas plugs or why they would have been removed, but what I do know is that their house was completely gone. Random debris and insulation were raining down on New Florence for over an hour after the explosion. Luckily, none of them were hurt. Poor Ben, who had just turned 5, lost all of his favorite toys in the house he'd grown up in. But the Rennicks were resilient people. Frank had plenty of money from Bow Wow, and he and Kim were able to rebuild the farmhouse, bigger and better than ever. That's the way to persevere in the midst of complete calamity, and I commend anyone who can pick themselves up and try again. The new house was 10,000 square feet. It was decked out, it had a pool with a diving board, and Frank and Kim worked hard for everything they had. They were very happy to spoil their kids with whatever new toys and games they wanted. But they were human, and they had their vices. Both Frank and Kim suffered from alcoholism, and their drinking got worse after the stress of rebuilding the new home. It's tough managing addiction, and Ben decided from a very early age that he didn't want to be anything like his parents. He preferred to keep to himself. He didn't drink, didn't go to parties or do drugs, and he was fine with that. It suited him. He had seen that side of life and wanted nothing to do with it. In 1993, Kim started having health issues, and sadly, she was diagnosed with cancer at only 41 years old. Kim was determined to fight the disease, and even in moments when Frank was overwhelmed, Kim was his rock. She was devoted to their children and wanted to be there for every single milestone. One of those milestones came when Ben proved he was responsible enough to take care of a pet. Kim and Frank took him to the local pet store, and can you guess what he picked out? A yellow rat snake. Ben was one of those people who was obsessed. If you got him talking about snakes, he wouldn't shut up about them. He collected snakes all through elementary and middle school, keeping them in small stacking drawers that he cleaned weekly. By the time he reached high school, Ben was purchasing ball pythons, reticulated pythons, Burmese pythons, and even anacondas. Ball pythons were his absolute favorite. They were small, docile, and beautiful to him. Snake collecting is actually a very intense hobby, and Ben's parents weren't sure if it was going to go anywhere, but he sure was spending a lot of money on snakes. Sam definitely didn't understand his brother's obsession. He wasn't interested and didn't want to touch them, but he had to admit that his brother was pretty cool. While Ben's hobby was taking off, Frank opened a new pet food company in 1996 called Spectrum Pet Care. Other associations, including SPS Brands and Consolidated Food Group, were all under the umbrella of Spectrum. Frank was the CEO. Spectrum made organic pet food and treats, and it was very successful, even in its early years. It had a lot of investors, which was a good thing because Frank had to pay for Kim's medical bills and help out with their elderly parents. In 2002, Ben's grandma sadly passed away, and this was another difficult time for the Rennicks. That same year, Ben was a freshman at Montgomery County R2 High School. Ben was artistic and nerdy. He got into heavy metal bands, learned to play the drums, and even played drums in his high school band for a while. On weekends, Ben took care of all his snakes. Sometimes he would do yard work for a man named Michael Scarlett, a handyman who lived about half a mile away. Ben was the only kid in the neighborhood who ever offered to help Michael, and Michael described Ben as very hardworking and friendly. By the time Ben graduated high school in 2006, he decided to turn his collection of snakes into a snake breeding business called Rennick Reptiles. He bred his first clutch of ball pythons in 2007. Now this process is called pairing, and it's where Ben would put one female snake with one male snake to produce what they call a clutch. A clutch had between 6 and 15 eggs which would sit in an incubator, and that's how you get baby pythons. Then, Ben would sell these snakes online. At 21 years old, he had 20 clutches per season, so he was selling hundreds of snakes. In the reptile world, pairing pythons is really tricky. You have to understand genetics and how different snakes will produce different patterns. Ben focused on getting the coolest colors and mutations possible. In 2010, he created an entirely white and purple ball python, the first in the world. This snake was named the Rennick Ghost. He was a pioneer. And that part one can get on board with because I love science, especially how genetics work. After this, Ben left New Florence for a little while, came back and started building his snake facility on that 72-acre property. As for the rest of his family, Kim's health was taking a turn for the worse. She had been battling cancer for nearly 15 years. Frank had been doing everything he could to get investors to invest in his company. He promised that Spectrum Food was the next big thing. It was going to be sold at 7-Eleven, and then came Mars and Walmart in 2006, 2007, and 2008. He sold hundreds of bonds, but that's when the financial crisis hit. Frank struggled to meet manufacturing demands and pay all of his employees. His son Sam, Ben's older brother, had been working at Spectrum as the plant manager, marketing director, and sales manager, so he was feeling a lot of pressure. He was clearly wearing a lot of hats, but he could tell his dad was really stressed. He also noticed that his dad wasn't managing the books correctly. Then in December of 2008, 56-year-old Kim tragically passed away in their home, surrounded by her boys. But before she passed, she looked her son Sam in the eye and told him that she wanted this house and this land that they lived on to stay in their family for generations to come. This was her dying wish, that Ben and Sam's kids one day would grow up on this land and continue the Rennick legacy. Kim's death left a hole in the family, and nothing would be the same again. Ben threw himself into his hobbies. He had a steady girlfriend at the time, played in a heavy metal band, and liked to go to the movie theater. I told you he was a big collector of snakes, but he was also a big collector of other things. He collected famous props from his favorite horror movies. His snake collection was getting bigger and bigger, and he was becoming very well known in the reptile community. The reptile community is very tight-knit. If you're immersed in this community, you know everyone, and everyone knew Ben. He'd go to all the conventions, and he even had his own YouTube channel called Rennick Reptiles, the same name as his company. He did a bunch of videos about his snakes. He was breeding 2,000 ball pythons a season, and Ben's clients would buy dozens of snakes from him because they trusted him to keep the snakes healthy and clean. He was a rising star. One of Ben's friends in the industry, his name is Dave Kaufman, called it a living art. Instead of a painter having a canvas, the snakes were all these colors on a palette that would come together to create something new. Ben was truly gifted. He was an artist in his field. On his YouTube channel, he gave a couple of tours of his facility. It was organized, clean, and perfect. You could tell just how much time he put into it, how professional he was, and how serious he was about his business and his community. He even did interviews on other channels, like Dave Kaufman's channel, where he talked about how he got into pairing and his love for snakes. He didn't do this for the money. He did it because it was truly his passion. He was passionate about this craft. In May of 2011, Ben's successful career was overshadowed by a huge scandal. His father was sued, and he faced 20 years in prison for fraud. Remember Spectrum, the very promising pet food brand? Well, it turned out it had become a Ponzi scheme. Frank was in over his head. Essentially, what this meant was that Frank would promise these investors that their funds would be returned to them and that their investment would produce a profit. But what he was doing was using this money for his personal gain, and when it ran out, he had to pay back investors. So he'd recruit even more investors to pay back the original investors. As each level of this scheme increased, it became more complicated and harder to maintain. Frank was in way over his head. In 2010, he had taken $7 million of investors' money and used it to pay 250 existing investors he had at the time. He would tell investors that their money was going to equipment, food production, and manufacturing, but he was using it to pay back his debt, and that is not okay. Eventually, this all came to light, and the news was everywhere. Between 2006 and 2008, Frank had used the investors' funds for his own purchases. He paid for a lot of medical care at St. John's Hospital for Kim and a dermatology office. This was most likely also to help Kim battle her cancer. He also paid for satellite TV, cars from Ford Motors, Carnival Cruise Line, and he even paid $70,000 to his son Ben for Rennick Reptiles. Last but not least, all those bonds I told you about that he sold to investors weren't even registered in the state of Missouri. So Frank had been in survival mode for years, and Spectrum imploded. A lot of people lost their jobs. I don't know why he did this. I know he must have been very desperate, but he was responsible. He made a very bad decision, and he couldn't turn it around. Tragically, on Father's Day in 2011, Ben found his 62-year-old dad lifeless in their home. Frank had a gun near his hand and a gunshot wound to his torso. When Ben found him, it was too late. Frank was already dead. Ben was in shock. It was Father's Day. This was his dad. Ben ran and got Sam, and together they called the police. When everything came out in the news, it was devastating for Sam and Ben. Sam lost his job too. Their dad had been suffering in silence for so long, trying to keep the company afloat, and now all of these other people were suffering as well. So now, as adults, Sam and Ben didn't spend as much time together like they did when they were kids, but they had to come together and figure all of this out. They did have some things in common. They both loved customer service, and they both loved working very hard. But that's pretty much where their similarities ended. Sam had a big personality. He liked to go out, drink, and party. Ben, on the other hand, preferred to stay inside with his snakes, and Sam thought his brother was no fun. The only thing they did together was go fishing. According to Frank's will, all of his money and his life insurance actually went to Sam, while Ben got all of the farmland. Frank and Kim had verbally expressed to Sam that he also had rightful ownership over the land, so they agreed that Sam and his wife, Alexandria, could move into the farmhouse. Ben was already building up his reptile facility. It was a one-story ranch house on the property, and he started building his own small house next to it. Sam got a new job, and Ben went through a very tough breakup. He toured around with his metal band for a while, and at one of those shows, he reconnected with an old friend, Lindley Joe Gallatin. They hit it off. They had already met back in high school when they were teenagers, but now they were both single and older, and they felt an instant connection. Soon, they became more than friends. Lindley was born on March 14, 1998. She grew up in a tiny Missouri town called Wellsville with her sister, April. Her dad, Lindley, was an electrician, and her mom, Brenda, was a nurse. Lindley inherited her love for animals, kids, and helping people from her parents. When she graduated in 2006, she got her massage therapy license through Metro Business College in Jefferson City, which is a town close to New Florence. When Lindley and Ben first met, she was actually dating a guy named Josh H. They had a child together named Matthew, but before she gave birth, Josh went on vacation to the Ozarks. He was driving under the influence and crashed into another car. He got 10 years in prison. A very pregnant Lindley, with her new massage therapy degree, was now a newly single mom. Lindley got a job at Riversong Spa. Massage therapy was definitely her calling. She was very passionate, loving, soft-spoken, and bubbly. Making friends came very naturally to her, and Lindley's 4-year-old Matthew was the light of her life. She wanted to marry a guy who loved her son as much as she did. Well, that's where Ben Rennick comes in. When they met, they immediately felt that connection and fell head over heels for one another. Where Lindley was extroverted, Ben was introverted. Lindley was a dreamer and Ben was a doer. They say that sometimes opposites attract, but when it came to their interests, everything matched up. Lindley loved animals and she was fascinated by Ben's snakes. Both of them were dedicated to great customer service. Lindley loved taking care of her clients, and Ben loved making friends at his reptile shows. They both loved music and movies. They went to the movie theater for a date night at least once a month. They both loved kids. Ben adored Maddie and treated him like he was his own son. Within a year, Lindley moved in with Ben and announced on Facebook that she was pregnant with a baby girl. Sam was thrilled for his brother. He had never seen Ben have so much fun and be so happy as he was with Lindley. Ben's entire world seemed to grow bigger when Lindley was around. She pushed him to get out and enjoy life, and in turn, Ben was a great partner. He took care of himself, lifted weights regularly, and had a tattoo sleeve featuring Godzilla and the Ghostbusters, which I thought was really cool. He was organized and meticulous, and he was very generous with his time. If Lindley or any of their friends needed anything, he was happy to lend a hand. It was no question that Ben's #1 love was his kids, not his snakes or his drums. His kids came first. Their daughter Amelia, nicknamed Emma, was born in 2012. That first year with a new baby is always a big adjustment, so Ben outgrew his band and moved on from that. Now he had kids of his own, just like his brother, and Sam and Ben would take their kids fishing on the weekends together. Ben and Lindley ended up getting married in St. Charles, Missouri, on April 13, 2014. It was a small outdoor ceremony. It was very beautiful, and Lindley changed her last name to Rennick. She quit her job at Riversong Spa, and by 2015, Lindley and Ben were running Rennick Reptiles together full-time. When you walked into Rennick Reptiles, you entered a long hallway with stacks and stacks of plastic shelving along the walls. To the left was the office, and down the hallway to the right was a half wall turning into another alcove with tons of shelves. All of these shelves held snakes. The staircase downstairs led to incubators and larger snakes, including Ben's prized 600-pound albino anaconda. Ben kept up to 3,000 snakes at any time, and when he wasn't spending his time overnight express shipping snakes all over the world, or pairing snakes and doing inventory, he was cleaning. Monday through Friday, he would clean 200 snake pens a day. Wednesdays were feeding day, and they'd put a rat in every drawer. Ben and Lindley were the most ethical, motivated, and humble snake breeders in the industry. Reptile conventions were like fraternity meetings. Everyone knew one another, and Ben was respected for his professionalism, artistry, cleanliness, and most of all, his fair business practices. At reptile conventions, he mentored up-and-coming businessmen, hung out with friends like David Levinson and Dave Kaufman, and Lindley also had her own friends at these conventions. Everyone got along so well and truly respected both Ben and Lindley. But at the end of the day, Rennick Reptiles was Ben's dream, and soon Lindley wanted something to call her own as well. Lindley wanted to get back into massage therapy and also work closer to her dad, Lyndall, who lived in Columbia, Missouri. She started working as a massage therapy instructor at Columbia Career College and began talking to Ben about her ideal career. Lindley had dreamed for years of opening her own massage practice, and with Ben's financial help, she opened Essentia Spa in 2016, focusing on stress relief, wellness services, and beauty treatments. Essentia was part of a red brick commercial building in Columbia in the Cherry Hill Shopping Plaza. This spa was about a 45-minute drive from their home in New Florence. Columbia, Missouri was much more built up than New Florence, where Ben and Lindley's home was. This area was very different. Where they lived was very rural and secluded, especially being on 72 acres of land. But now Lindley had something of her own, and she was able to be more social. Unlike Ben, she definitely thrived being around other people, so she ended up hiring 15 new employees ranging from massage therapists to estheticians. While Essentia was her new project, she knew that she wasn't great with numbers, so she ended up hiring her best friend from Riversong Spa, Ashley Shaw, to be the manager. Ashley had an assertive personality and was experienced doing business in California. She spent her time at the bank and at the front desk, where Lindley usually left her phone when she was with clients, so Ashley was just managing everything. Lindley spent her days at the spa, dropping off and picking up kids from school, while Ben was slowly downsizing Rennick Reptiles. In February 2017, Ben's friend David connected him with a man named Robin Leoner, who was a goalie in the National Hockey League. Robin wanted to purchase all of Ben's Python collection, which Ben evaluated at $1.9 million. That's a lot of money, especially for someone in a small town in Missouri. Ben's kids, Maddie and Emma, would be set, and of course, the Rennicks were really living the American dream. Robin and Ben discussed the deal, and Robin's final offer was $1.2 million for the collection. Ben agreed, even though they had a dispute during the deal. They couldn't figure out how much would be paid over what time frame and when Robin would be able to physically pick up the snakes. They settled on 6 installment payments every 3 months until Robin possessed all the pythons. At least that was the plan. Ben got his first installment payment of $200,000 in February 2017. He was finally cashing out on all of his assets and the work he put into this company. Now he had money to buy new snakes for an even bigger project he had in mind. Of course, Lindley still had her spa, they still had the kids, but Ben was going to be a millionaire by the next year, and he felt invincible. If only he were invincible, then I wouldn't be telling you this story. So, let's fast forward to Thursday, June 8th, 2017. It was a hot, clear summer day. There were barely any clouds in the sky. Lindley was driving home from the spa when the school called her. They told her that Ben had not picked up the kids, and that was concerning because he would never forget about them. Lindley quickly swung over to the school, picked up Maddie and Emma, and then texted the babysitter that she would be about 15 minutes late. She and Ben had plans that night to go see Wonder Woman for their monthly date night. But when Lindley turned onto the 72-acre property around 6 p.m., she had a very bad feeling. She told her kids to wait in the car and went into the reptile building alone, calling out for Ben. He wasn't in his office, so she walked down the hall, turned to the right, and that's when she saw a body lying face down in a large pool of blood. Lindley screamed. She thought it had to be Ben. Who else would be in his reptile facility in the middle of the afternoon, apart from maybe Sam? But Sam didn't like snakes, and the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. So, hysterical, Lindley picked up the phone and called Sam. He had no idea what she was saying. It was gibberish. When he got over there, the kids were outside the vehicle, watching their mother in a state of panic. Matthew, who was 9, looked at Sam and said, "Is my daddy dead?" These kids were completely confused, and Lindley couldn't even form a sentence. Sam didn't know what to think or what happened. He went inside Rennick Reptiles, but he couldn't find Ben. He had to go back outside and ask Lindley what was going on. At this point, she had called 911. She was crying, hyperventilating, and told the dispatcher that she found her husband on the ground, and there was blood everywhere. Then Lindley took Sam inside. Ben was lying on his stomach. His head was facing the very southern wall of the facility. On the 911 call, you can hear Sam say, "Oh my God, my brother's dead." And now he was the one panicking, surrounded on all sides by thousands of snakes. Sam bent down to the ground and rolled his brother onto his back, because maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that it wasn't Ben. Maybe it was an intruder and Ben got away, maybe. But no, it was his brother Ben. His face was horribly bruised, his skull looked like it was crushed. Sam thought it had to be a snake. He even told the 911 operator it was almost like it was to be expected, with Ben handling these creatures, that one day a tragedy like this would happen. Lindley told the dispatcher that there was a snake on the loose, and Sam had a bad feeling it was Ben's 600-pound anaconda. The two of them went back outside. It was just complete chaos. I've never researched a case like this before. There was so much going on. Did a snake do this? Was that even possible? Well, that was the question. Anacondas do and can bite, even though they're not venomous. It would definitely hurt to be bitten. Anacondas kill their prey by constricting it, squeezing it until it stops moving and then swallowing them whole, no matter the size, because their jaws actually stretch. But clearly, Ben was not swallowed by a snake. From the looks of his head, Sam assumed the snake had at least made its way around and done this damage. I looked online and found an 800-pound anaconda. Ben's was only 600 pounds, but the one I found was 33 feet long. You can just imagine how massive this is. Although I don't know exactly how big Ben was, you can imagine it's not too far off in size. I heard that the longest one he had was 12 feet. That's still pretty big. When Sam came out of the facility, he was covered in his brother's blood, and Maddie and Emma looked at him in horror. Sam took him by the hands and walked them to the big farmhouse where his own kids were. Sam had actually been in the middle of interviewing a new babysitter and had left the babysitter and the mom with his kids while he went to check on Lindley. Now, he was coming back with the other kids. This was one of the hardest conversations that Sam ever had to have, trying to explain to his kids and his niece and nephew that they were never going to see or talk to their dad again. Sam left the kids in the main house and went back to Ben's corner of the property where the EMTs had just arrived. Dee, an EMT, asked Sam to please show her where the body was, and inside he was laying face up. Sam said, "I rolled Ben over." Dee had owned snakes before, and she knew that snakes were usually harmless, but the officers en route were already terrified. Knowing where they were headed, they knew who Ben was. They knew what he did for a living, and the thought of being surrounded by snakes freaked them out. Especially getting a call that there could be one loose that just killed someone. When Dee went inside to do her initial assessment, she found that Ben Rennick had been dead for at least a few hours. Rigor mortis had already been setting in. She wasn't sure if the damage done to his skull was caused by a snake or not. It actually didn't seem likely. However, she did notice what appeared to be bite marks on his arm. Disturbed by just how much blood was everywhere, Dee covered Ben with a white sheet and went back outside to tell Lindley, who was still hysterical, that her husband had passed away. Lindley let out another scream and asked how she and her children were going to survive without Ben. She also cried out that a snake could not have done this. Was she in denial because of her own love for the creatures? Then the Missouri Highway Patrol and Sheriff's Department showed up, along with the coroner Dave Colbert and Deputy Harley Alt. They were terrified. I want you to imagine a bunch of grown men holding shotguns and yelling that if they see a snake, they're going to shoot it without a second thought. Lindley told them that a snake did not do this. She was repeating this. Ben was a professional. He knew how to handle these snakes. What were the odds that an accident like this could have happened? But we also have to keep in mind that not everyone has been in the presence of a snake, let alone big snakes, so it is a justifiable fear. I heard one officer on the body cam footage I watched literally tell the other officers, when they're going in, there could be a snake on the loose, so watch your asses. I don't want to make light of this, but even the EMT explained that you would see a snake coming. It's not like a snake is going to slither super fast and wrap itself around you. You're going to have enough time to run away. But these people did not have experience with this, so you can't blame them. First, the officers made sure Ben's body was clear of snakes. They asked Sam what he had seen when he arrived, and that's when he said, well, Lindley had gotten there before he did. He didn't know what Ben's initial condition was like. When he arrived, he found his brother lying face down in the southern area of the building and had to turn him over to see what happened. Coroner Colbert crouched down to inspect the body. Ben's head was very close to a snake rack on the south wall. Within 15 seconds of getting eye level with the bottom rack, Colbert noticed a glint of gold on that shelf. It was a shell casing from a bullet. That's when he knew this was not a snake attack. There was probably not even a snake on the loose. This was a homicide, and the sheer amount of blood on the floor meant that Ben had not been shot just once, but multiple times. Coroner Colbert told Deputy Al, and they started scouring the scene for more shell casings, trying to find out how many bullets had been shot and where they were from. From what the officials could tell, Ben had been shot several times in his back, and it appeared from the casings it was a .40 caliber because these were Winchester SA bullets. Ben was probably caught off guard and fell to the floor. But that's where things got weird. When they were able to move his body, they found 2 divots in the ground that looked like they had been struck by small projectiles, as well as 1 divot near one of his hands. However, the bullets weren't on the floor, not even fragments. They looked at the floor in other parts of the building, but these were the only 3 divots they found. Also, Ben had a large head wound that had been caused by a gunshot at close range. Sam had wrongly thought that his head had been squeezed so powerfully that it cracked like this, and that the death was caused by strangulation. So had the perpetrator shot Ben from a distance at first into his back and then, as he fell, walked over to him and shot him in the head just to make sure he wasn't alive. That's what it appeared had happened from the divots, but it was hard to tell. It seemed as though whoever shot Ben knew what they were doing because they had only missed once, and the bullet had gone through one of the snake pens about 40 inches off the ground, breaking through a few plastic containers and landing in a container with a snake. Officers tested blood drops on the scene as well, and Ben kept this place as clean as possible, but there were some other areas that could have either been dirt or dried blood. One droplet was dried blood, but it didn't look like it belonged to the actual crime scene. Maybe a puncture wound happened at another time with a snake, but of course, more information would be found after the autopsy. There were 20 professionals at the crime scene, with several of them wearing body cameras. When Sam learned that his brother's death was a homicide, he actually started making some really weird comments under his breath. Things like, Ben was cheap, he didn't lock the doors of his snake facility, he should have hired someone, so he had more help. I saw the door to this place, and I do have to say, it looked like one of those ordinary doors. Ordinary locks you could actually lock from the inside and use a key to open from the outside. Nothing fancy, no cameras, no security system. Sam thought, if only Ben had help, maybe someone would have been there to save him. Sam also started talking about Ben's financial situation. Things like if he had so much money, why was he so frugal? Sam was clearly upset. This was his last surviving family member, and it seemed as though he was in shock and just throwing ideas around. But then he said, "That's right, I'm the brother murderer. I understand being defensive if you've been accused of a crime, but nobody was accusing him of anything." Deputy Al thought that was very strange. Why would he say that? The next step in this investigation was into Ben's closest family, Lindley and Sam. Lindley had found Ben before anyone else, which automatically made her a suspect. And Sam touched his brother's body and may have had a motive since he was going around the crime scene criticizing his now deceased brother, so he was also a suspect. Corporal Devin Faust was assigned to the case and arrived around 8:30 p. with a few goals in mind: tour the facility, interview the family, and figure out as much as he could about Ben's life. He was shocked when he saw Ben's snake facility and realized how big it was. He had heard of rennet reptiles, but he didn't know there were thousands of snakes being housed there. He took Lindley and Sam back to the station and learned that one of Ben's friends, David Levinson, I remember him. I did talk to you about him before. He used to go to conventions, the one who introduced Ben to the hockey player. Well, he lived just a few hours away and could help out by searching the crime scene because he could handle the snakes. So they called him in. Meanwhile, Sam told Fa that Ben was in the middle of a business deal with this professional hockey player, and when he spoke to David Levinson, Levinson explained to the detective that Ben had just sold 2 of his snakes not too long ago for $85,000. That was shocking. Not many people are aware how valuable these animals are. That made Detective Fa think this could have been a robbery. So back at the Montgomery County Sheriff's Station, Corporal Faust was interviewing Lindley. She sat down in her Essentia Spa uniform and had processed the situation enough to be coherent and have a conversation. They asked her what she had been up to that day. Lindley said she was working at the spa, and the last time she had been in communication with Ben, she texted him around 3:45 p.m. Lindley told him that she had a headache and wasn't feeling well and needed to go lie down. Ben asked if she needed him to pick up the kids, and she said yes, so he agreed. But when she finally took off from work and headed home, the school called her and said that no one picked up Maddie and Emma. Lindley told the detective she was really worried. She said she called Ben several times, but the phone just rang. This wasn't like him, not to answer his phone. She then explained that when she got to the facility, she just had a bad feeling. He had never forgotten about the kids or not answered like this, so before she went in, she made the kids stay in the car, and that's when she found Ben's body. Then Faust asked her if she had any questions for them, and she just muttered, "What happened?" He told her, "We don't know yet," and then she said, "What do I do?" This woman looked completely lost. Faust told her to lean on her friends and family during this challenging time she was going to be facing. Then he asked her if they could collect fingerprints, DNA, and do a gunshot residue test. Lindley was fully cooperative, and he asked her if she knew anyone who would be upset with Ben to the point that they would kill him, and she said no. But then Faust asked if there were any family issues, and Lindley kind of laughed uncomfortably and said, "Between Sam and Ben, yeah." This was news to Faust. He hadn't heard Sam's comments at the crime scene. Lindley told him that Sam and Ben had gotten into an argument about the 72-acre property where they lived. She explained that Ben had inherited Frank's property, and Sam had inherited Frank's money. But Sam was the jealous type. The property was worth a lot more, and the big farmhouse was so old it was now falling apart. It needed $50,000 in renovations that Sam did not have the money for, so Sam was going to have to leave his home. Instead of leaving, he came to Ben and asked if he could just have half of the land, and Ben was like, "No, I'm not just going to give you half of the property." Ben was in the process of selling off his assets. He wasn't going to give up land for free. But he had a plan. He was going to sell the property, but Sam was mad that it was their mother's land. So he asked Ben if he could pay him for the entire property to keep it in the family, but Ben knew Sam didn't have that kind of money. So they kept fighting. They could not come to an agreement. At one point, it was very contentious. Lindley said she tried to smooth things over, so she sent Sam a text telling him how much that hurt Ben. She then got a text from Sam's wife that basically just said, "Fuck you." So things were not good. Lindley said Sam and Ben never got along as adults. Sam was overly dramatic, in your face, and she called his personality depressing. Whatever she had seen between the two of them, it wasn't good. Corporal Faust had plans to ask Sam all about this. Lindley went home to her kids, and now it was early in the morning on the 9th. Next was Sam's interview. He wasn't told that Lindley had given him a pretty bad review. They started by asking him about his day. Sam said he got to work, picked up his 2 kids from school, and returned to the big farmhouse where he lived with his wife. He was meeting with a potential babysitter when Lindley called him. Then Corporal Faust asked if Lindley would be capable of murder, and Sam was like, "No, we love Lindley." When they asked if Ben had anyone else in his life that might be capable, Sam couldn't believe that anyone would kill his brother. Ben was such a nice, genuine guy. Sam thought there is no way the person who shot him knew him personally. Then Sam talked about his relationship with his brother. He said he loved him, but that they did not always get along. He held some resentment over Ben's career because all he could talk about was his reptiles, and he was pretty arrogant. He liked to brag that he was at the top of his field, had all this money. Sam hated to talk about money because he was struggling financially. He didn't like to hear his brother bragging all the time, and Ben didn't like to go out or drink or hang out, so he wasn't very fun in Sam's opinion. But this didn't seem like the whole story. It seemed like Sam was jealous, like Lindley said. But Sam adamantly refused that he would ever kill his brother. He had another theory. Sam told Faust the story of their father, Frank, and how he committed fraud. He said Frank's decisions caused a lot of people to hit rock bottom. They were angry. Sam and Ben had never had issues with Frank's old employees or investors, but there was a chance that someone wanted revenge. They knew how successful Ben was, and maybe they resented that Ben's reptile business was so successful that this could have been a robbery gone wrong. Plus, Sam told Faust that Rennick Reptiles had been robbed before. A few years before this, someone had broken in and stolen $6,000 from the office, but Ben just brushed it off. He could sell a couple of snakes and make that money back in no time. When Corporal Faust asked who owned the land, Sam confirmed Lindley's story that he got the money and Ben got the land. Sam was considering leaving the big farmhouse. He was spending more than he was making, and he couldn't afford $50,000 in repairs. However, Sam said that he and Ben came up with a plan, a verbal compromise. Their parents had told Ben and Sam verbally that the will was a bunch of legal jargon, and in the ideal scenario they would split the land evenly. So Ben and Sam came up with an outline of which half of the land was whose. Sam said they had never gotten into a heated argument, and he never demanded half of the property. However, Sam did sound bitter. He constantly denied, though, that he had anything to do with this tragedy. It was so early in the morning at this point. He was exhausted. He offered whatever he could do to help the investigation. When they asked for his fingerprints, his DNA, and a gunshot residue test, he agreed to everything. He even gave them full access to all of his apps on his cell phone, including Facebook. But they noticed Sam was sweating through his shirt halfway through the interview. He took it off and then offered it to the police. But why would he be sweating through his shirt? Did he have something to hide? Was he just nervous? Was this just a lot for someone to take? Sam did offer to take a polygraph. He promised to make himself available for whatever the detectives needed. It didn't seem likely that he would be so open if he were the killer. Honestly, you just never know. After Sam's interview, Corporal Faust went back to the snake facility to get a bunch of pictures of the entire crime scene. David was finally there, and he gave Faust somewhat of a tour. He helped him look through all the snake pens to see if anything was missing. He explained Ben's career and how important Ben was to the reptile community. David also told the story again about how Ben was going to sell his entire ball python collection to Robin Leonard. When Corporal Faust asked how much the collection was worth, David thought maybe $400,000 or $500,000 at most. But David said no. The ball pythons were worth over $1 million, and some of these snakes were worth a lot on their own. Based on the number of bullets and shell casings that were collected, Ben had sustained 5 gunshots. It's not quite overkill, but a calculated, cold-blooded murder. What would be the motive? It seemed clear that someone had to have wanted Ben's money. But when police went through the office and all the snake drawers, there was nothing missing. Investigators couldn't find any DNA or foreign fingerprints on the scene, apart from those who lived and worked there, like Ben and Lindley. They also thought it was unlikely someone had come back to take revenge for Frank's actions 5 years before that, and it was even less likely that this was a robbery. It was more likely that Ben knew this person and that they had a grudge of some kind against him. Maybe it was someone in competition with him. By the morning, the gunshot residue results came back for both Sam and Lindley, and they were both negative. But that didn't mean they were exonerated. Gunshot residue can be removed by washing and scrubbing the body, so either of them could have potentially done it and then taken a shower. Sam had a clear motive. He didn't want his family's land to be sold, and he had a rough alibi. It wasn't exactly solid, while Lindley's alibi seemed more solid. But spouses are always suspects because of how close they are to the victim. When Faust interviewed people in the community, a few were very straightforward and said Sam did it. Others insisted that the brothers were very close since they lived right near each other and had always been together on that property. Others knew that the brothers had very different personalities. The day after Ben's murder, Sam decided to hang up a sign on the road leading up to his house that said, "I'm drunk and I'm armed." Well then, enough said, right? But armed meant Sam had a gun. Some people took this as a threat. I like to play devil's advocate. Sam was still processing Ben's death. He didn't want company. Maybe he had no clue that he was even a suspect at this point. He could have thought he was just being questioned as a witness. In the next couple of weeks, he worked through the anger, the guilt, and the resentment that came with grief. After that, he had nothing but good things to say about his brother. That's convenient now that he's gone. Corporal Faust talked to Ben's neighbors, Michael Scarlett and Babette Tucker. Babette had known the ranks since before Ben was even born, and she said she did not think Sam or Lindley could even hurt a fly. Michael Scarlett, who lived half a mile away, told Faust that on the afternoon of June 8th, he heard a woman screaming. After everything was said and done, and everyone knew what was happening, Faust figured that this was Lindley finding Ben's body. He interviewed Ben and Lindley's babysitter, Catherine, who had been taking care of the children every week for years. She had received a text that night saying Lindley was running late and that her services wouldn't be needed that night, so this was a dead end. Faust kept his options open. He hadn't talked to Robin, the hockey player, yet, but if he ran out of ideas, that option was still in his back pocket. Meanwhile, Lindley was struggling. The week after Ben died, she actually moved into her father's home in Columbia, Missouri, with the kids, where she was trying to rebuild their life piece by piece. David was also grieving his friend's death, and he agreed to stay in the area and take care of all of Ben's snakes for free. The entire reptile community was shaken up, and Ben's friend Dave Kaufman started planning a fundraiser for Ben's family. This fundraiser was held on Wednesday, June 14th. It was a huge online auction of all of Ben's snakes. The bidding price of a small ball python started at $5, and people paid up to $6,000 for the snakes. They were able to raise over $40,000 for Lindley and the kids in Ben's name. Ben's funeral ceremony was held a week after that. When Sam arrived, Lindley wasn't there yet, and that's when he was told he could not go inside the funeral home until Lindley arrived. That was weird to him. Sam wanted to see his brother's cremated remains, but Lindley did not want anyone alone with Ben's ashes. It's understandable. You're worried, you're scared. This is something so tragic. But some people wondered why she thought Sam was the killer and was being protective. Maybe she hadn't forgotten Sam's comments at the crime scene, or maybe she just didn't like him. At the end of the ceremony, the family let balloons fly into the air, and that's when little Maddie broke down in tears. He was screaming, "Why, Mommy? Why?" And Ben's daughter, Emma, she didn't know what was happening. These poor kids were traumatized. They did not know who would do this to their daddy and why. Ben's autopsy results revealed that he had been shot 8 times. Once again, one bullet had missed his body and hit the snake pen. The other 8 entrance wounds were in the back, neck, and shoulder area. He had been shot 5 times in quick succession in the back, meaning he probably didn't know what was happening to him and fell to the floor before he could process the pain. One of these bullets was lodged in his right shoulder area. Another one had gone through his right elbow and didn't exit, but created an exit wound on the outside. Then the perpetrator approached him and fired one shot through the back of his head and one shot through the left side of his jaw, which exited through the right. These shots hit the floor, creating those divots, but the bullets stayed inside his skin, which was why investigators had not been able to find them in their initial investigation. The divot near his hand was still a bit of a mystery, though, probably made by a shell hitting the ground, since there was no gunshot residue on his body from these 2 entrance wounds. These 2 shots had to have been fired at least 18 to 20 inches above Ben's body. I'm not great with math or distances, but I wasn't sure what 18 to 20 inches above the ground would have meant. You'd have to account for how long the muzzle of this gun was, how long the person's arm was, plus how the gun was pointed. It's common sense that usually when you shoot a gun, your arm is fully extended, but it doesn't have to be. So, all I'm trying to get to is they were trying to figure out how far the person was and how tall the person was, but it was really hard to determine someone's height according to the way a bullet struck someone. But trajectory can be figured out. I'm sure you've seen Dexter before. It's the same concept. They put those pieces of red string out, calculate the distance where the bullet came from, and sometimes exactly where the muzzle was and how far away. The last shot Ben sustained was a contact wound. Someone had actually placed the muzzle directly against Ben's temple and fired, creating a lot of pressure that caused significant injury to his brain and brain stem. It was an injury that nobody could have survived, and that last shot caused a visible wound, like blowing out part of his skull. But this is why his brother thought it was actually squeezed, and this was causing a lot of significant bruising to his face as well. Officers had not been able to find all 8 shell casings, meaning that someone had tried to pick up some of the casings, but they weren't able to find a few, including one that was under Ben's underarm. They were able to retrieve 4 intact bullets and 1 shattered bullet from Ben's body. As for the puncture wounds on his arm, they appeared to have been a snake bite at first, and a random drop of blood away from the crime scene seemed to be related, but it turns out they weren't. They don't know how they got there. The Missouri State Highway Patrol Troop F and the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department continued to work on this case, as well as the St. Louis Dispatch, which had more officers available. They looked further into Ben's finances, because when it came to money, they had to figure out who would benefit financially from his death the most. Ben did not have a will, and it wasn't clear who would inherit all of his assets. Since his father, Frank, had passed away, he left the land and assets in a trust fund with a trustee. If Ben died without selling the assets, they would be passed on to the next generation of Rennicks, which were Ben's children. Ben's life insurance package, a whopping $1 million through Minnesota Life, wasn't clear whether there was a trust fund or not. Detectives were very confused, and it turns out Lindley was also confused. When police called Minnesota Life, they found out that Lindley had also called. That's normal for a beneficiary. They have a duty to figure out all of the funeral and other expenses related to the death. Lindley was gathering the same information about whether the $1 million was part of a trust going to the kids, who were the secondary beneficiaries. I'm sure you know that a beneficiary is the person next in line to receive the money. If it wasn't a trust fund and Lindley was the primary beneficiary, she wanted to understand the process for being able to access these funds. She asked the company if she could be appointed what's called the next friend of Emma, so that she would have some control over where the money went. I know this could come off as shady, but police knew she was a business owner. She had to pay for funeral and business expenses, and she was having a rough time. She wasn't answering phone calls from people in New Florence, and was spending most of her time with her dad and the kids. Bobette, the neighbor, described Lindley's behavior as fading away, and nobody could blame her. But we always have to look at things in different ways. Was it shady that she had called the insurance company the day after Ben passed away? That could seem pretty fast, but this was also an unexpected death. There's a lot to do in a short amount of time. Even if the money was hers to claim, she wouldn't get all of it until she was cleared of suspicion. That's just standard procedure when dealing with a murder. So Corporal Faust needed to know more. He called her in for another interview on June 19th, 11 days after Ben was killed. Lindley sat down again with Corporal Faust. He asked for permission to download the contents of Lindley's phone, and she agreed. Unfortunately, this download didn't work, so apparently some phones just don't download well. Faust had to look through everything manually. He examined her call log, her Facebook Messenger, and texts from the day of June 8th, and he found a bunch of messages between Ben and Lindley. Totally normal. They were a married couple. They discussed their day. Ben asked Lindley if she was mad at him because her texts were shorter than usual. She said at 10:49 and 12:40 that she had a massive headache. But back at 11 o'clock, between those two texts, he had sent Lindley some financial details because he talked with his financial advisor, and he complained about the deal with that guy Robin. At 2:27, Lindley actually sent Ben some risque nude photos. Ben was appreciative. They talked about her headache again, and if she needed him to pick up the kids, and she said yes, so he agreed. But while all this was happening, Lindley was also texting a person by the name of Michael H. in her phone. She told Michael over text that she was exhausted, and that's when he offered something that the detectives did not expect. Drugs. But not Tylenol or Advil. No, he offered her some meth. Then they had no less than 6 calls over the course of the day, all about 2 or 3 minutes long. Of course, Faust asked Lindley, "Who's Michael H?" And she said, "Oh, that's Michael Humphrey. His mom used to come in for regular massages." Then F asked why they had called 5 times and were texting on the day of June 8th but hadn't texted her since. Lindley clarified her story. She said Michael had reached out for a massage, but he was having car trouble, and she wanted to make sure he could still come in for his appointment. But she wasn't going to mention the meth. Maybe it wasn't as important as who Michael was. Then Corporal Faust asked about the spa. How was business? Lindley admitted that she was having a little trouble making ends meet, but it was nothing that she and her manager, Ashley, couldn't handle. Faust then asked her about her relationship with Ben. He wanted to know if she had been unfaithful, if she had been talking or having a relationship with someone else at the time of Ben's death. Surprisingly, while I was watching this interview, I was even like, "What? Are you serious?" She said yes. She was honest, I'll give her that, but she said she had been hooking up with a man named Eric Bremer who worked for a local radio station doing some marketing and advertising for the spa. He and Lindley started seeing each other about once a month to go over the performance of her campaigns, and over time they began having sex on a regular basis. They were hooking up maybe once or twice a month in her massage rooms, and Ben had even met Eric a few times, but he had no idea that she was having an affair. However, Lindley insisted the affair was purely physical. She said if you asked Eric, he would agree it was just sex. It was nothing more. So Faust left the interview with some new leads. Eric Bremer, who may have a motive because of the affair, this guy Michael Humphrey, who had gotten a massage on June 8th and asked Lindley if she wanted drugs, and then Ashley Shaw, who was the manager of Essentia Spa. She would definitely have more information about the financial situation. It was easy to track down Eric. He said that Lindley was one of the nicest people he had ever met. Eric was also married, but he was looking for an escape in an unhealthy relationship, according to him. So that's why he had an affair. He said that Lindley and he started hooking up, and they still were. But of course, after what happened to Ben, Lindley was so upset that she grew very distant. He did say he was not planning on ending the affair, but he knew nothing about Ben's murder. After a full investigation, Eric was ruled out as a suspect. However, it was much harder to track down Michael Humphrey. They tried to track him down based on a previous address, but he no longer lived there. On July 17th, they found him and looked through his phone. There was nothing out of the ordinary with his messages to Lindley on June 8th, but he did have a new message from her. It was a thumbs-up emoji from June 19th, the day that police had interviewed Lindley about her affair with Eric. Was this a coincidence or something else? After the thumbs up, Michael texted back, asking how Lindley was doing because he hadn't heard from her in a while. Lindley said the thumbs-up emoji was a mistake. She said Emma was playing with her phone and accidentally sent him that message. But considering they hadn't talked to each other in 2 weeks, it was interesting how her baby, her little girl, was able to send that message. Because if you know iPhones or phones at all, it's not like Lindley's messages to Michael would have been pinned at the top. If you've been messaging other people, especially if 2 weeks have gone by, her conversation would have been way down at the bottom. But that wasn't enough evidence to mean that Michael was involved in anything either. So the investigators went to talk to Ashley. This was Lindley's best friend and the manager of the spa, as well as the rest of the spa employees, including a woman named Rachel Hunt. Now, Rachel didn't know anything about the murder. Ashley also denied knowing anything, but she was Lindley's closest friend. Ashley told Faust, "I'm sure you know that Lindley was having an affair. Well, a couple of affairs." Faust nodded and was playing along. He wanted to know more because he didn't know there was more than one. Ashley said that Lindley had actually gone on dating apps since that summer, and she had met a guy named Brandon Blackwell recently, like in the last month or two before Ben passed away. Last Ashley knew, Brandon and Lindley were still seeing each other. They were together. So of course, Corporal Faust had been keeping an eye out for any suspicious activity on the snake farm. He had the perfect spy in the form of David. David had only seen Lindley twice, and one time she was with another guy. Lindley introduced this guy as Brandon, whom she called an old friend. But he's not. He's from a dating app. However, David didn't know that, so he thought the guy was nice, and that was that. But David did notice they seemed closer than friends. You could just tell. especially because they seemed like they could not take their eyes off one another. So, Corporal Faust already knew about Brandon from David, but now he had Brandon's last name and more of the story. He tracked down Brandon Blackwell in mid-August of 2017, and this man was head over heels for Lindley. She could do that to a man. Brandon and Lindley had been romantically involved for nearly 4 months, and Brandon claimed that they had this really special connection. I've heard that before. Call it what you want, but it's sad that Ben had this going on behind his back while he was alive. During this interview, Brandon denied being involved in Ben's murder. He said that Lindley was not either. She had nothing to do with it. So now the police had nothing. Even if they got fingerprints and DNA from everyone, it would have been no use. What they really needed was someone to confess that they knew something about this crime, something that other people didn't know. It was a waiting game. Sure, there were a lot of things wrong with lying to your partner and seeing other people behind their back, but they needed more. David, who had stayed and worked with the Snakes, was there for over a year. This guy was a really good friend. He was cleaning out the snake pens one day when he found another shell casing, so he sent it to the police, who sent it to the crime lab. But it didn't lead to anything. They already had the shell casings. So now they turned back to the finances. You may be wondering what was happening with the Essentia Spa. Well, the police had gotten a warrant to look through the contents of Ben's phone, and what they found were conversations about Lindley's finances. She had every financial problem you could name. Lindley had messaged Ben asking for money to cover several different lawsuits. So when she said it was manageable, I don't know what she was talking about. She was being sued by Capital One. She hadn't paid a couple of contractors, totaling maybe $10,000. She also wasn't able to pay her rent. Lindley had been losing money for a long time, but she did not tell Ben, and in May, he found out. He was upset, rightfully so. It seemed Lindley was good at hiding things, her affairs, her money problems. Could she be hiding something else? Ben said in a series of texts, "We are already paying $4,000 a month to keep your doors open. It's basically already covering your rent and loan. I mean, literally, it would cost us more money for you to close and for the lawyers to come after us for all those things. We owe almost $200,000 in debt on the spa. I'm really not sure what to do about it. I honestly don't know. Even if I file bankruptcy, the bank could put liens against us personally." After Ben's dad's business had imploded years before, it made sense that Ben would be upset. But now I wonder, was Ben selling his assets so that he could help his wife get out of all this debt? Ben then sent a text on the day of his murder that said, "No more lying. No more keeping things from me. No more not paying people and thinking it's okay to pay later." This text was on his phone, but when Faust had looked through Lindley's phone on June 19th, he didn't see that text, which meant she had erased it. What was she hiding? And if Ben was accusing her of lying, did he know that she was also being unfaithful? That now seems kind of sketchy. But then again, sometimes in some cases, I've seen people who delete anything negative, anything they were texting or anything like that, between someone who just died, because they don't want to remember the bad times, only the good times. So who knows? But they also do this sometimes because they don't want to give authorities the impression that there were any issues between them. Investigators thought Lindley's financial problems gave her a motive for murder, but there was not enough evidence to arrest her. In the meantime, she was still trying to get herself out of debt. Lindley was not able to sign up as what I told you was called a next friend to her kids, so she was not able to claim the life insurance. In August, after Ben's murder, Lindley made the executive decision to sell her spa. She didn't own Ben's assets, but suddenly the Rennick family property was being sold on the market. It didn't matter whether she got the life insurance money or not. The 72 acres of land were worth over $800,000. Sam, who was still a suspect at the time, was at his house when someone came knocking on his door and said that he had 30 days to leave his own home. That was his property. Sam thought back to his mom's dying wish that her grandkids would live on that land, and now Sam had 30 days to move his stuff into a storage unit and find somewhere else to live with his wife. He also had to find a place to move all of Ben's things. Why? This made him feel so betrayed by Lindley. Sam did not understand why she was selling the property that he was living on. And that just blows my mind because it's family. I mean, I understand that a wife is family too, but on top of the $800,000, Lindley had gotten that $40,000, remember, from the reptile community, the fundraiser. And now she got to sell all of Ben's snakes. She got into a legal situation with Robin, the man who was supposed to owe Ben $1 million for the ball pythons. Well, because the snake farm was part of the trust going to the kids, this became very legally confusing. No one was sure whether Lindley could even sell the snakes to Robin anymore, so all of this had to be put on hold during the investigation. And because of that, I know you're not going to believe this, but Robin's hockey fan base started breaking into the building and taking snakes. Since Robin had paid that $200,000 installment plan to Ben and Robin hadn't received all of the ball pythons, he figured he was entitled to them. It was just absolute chaos. Because of the break-ins, the snakes got around the facility. They started breeding with different bins. It was a mess. Lindley all of a sudden wanted to get rid of the snakes, and she did this behind David's back. She actually contacted one of her friends that she had met in the reptile world, a woman named Megan, and she offered to sell Megan the anaconda. Well, Megan was better friends with David, so she called David and said, "Lindley's trying to sell me the snakes." David was shocked. He said, "Pretend to go through with the deal and see what happens." Megan was just stringing Lindley along, and then she backed out. That's when Lindley got really upset with David for interrupting the deal, and she even sent him a text threatening legal action. But if you asked Lindley and her dad about all this, and Corporal Faust did, he questioned her and visited her regularly, she denied that she had a role in selling Ben's assets. She didn't have control over the trust, which means she didn't have control over the snakes or the property. The person in charge of selling the farm was a trustee, a legal representative assigned to her children as their next friend. So that's who was doing all this. Lindley wanted to move forward, and that meant stepping back and letting hard financial decisions be made by a state representative, even if it made her look bad. So there was more to it. She wasn't actually in charge of doing that. 4 months later, after Ben's murder in August, Corporal Faust was doing a little research on Michael Humphrey. Do you remember his name? He found out that Michael was actually Lindley's ex-boyfriend, which was interesting. Was there still something between them that would maybe give him a motive? It still bothered Faust that Lindley had been texting Michael on the 8th and then on the 19th of June. So he looked further into Michael's life. Michael had worked a lot of odd jobs, including selling some stereo equipment and painkillers. He and Lindley were together in 2010 before they had broken up. Then Michael went to jail for drug possession charges. He'd been using and selling painkillers and meth, and had a history of harming animals, specifically torturing cats. He had gotten out of jail in mid-May, just weeks before Ben was killed. So why had Lindley gotten in contact with him again? I think she initially said his mom was coming in for massages. She never said it was her ex. Well, Faust sat down with Lindley in another interview. I know this has been a lot of interviews, but little progress, but this time she took a polygraph test. The usual questions: did you shoot Ben? Do you feel guilty about his death? She answered no, no, no. At the end, he asked Lindley how she thought she did on the polygraph, and she said, "I think I did well." The truth is, she thought wrong. Her polygraph was a complete failure according to the results, which I mention in every video are not conclusive anyway, because polygraphs are not reliable, but it said she had been deceptive again and again. When they told Lindley, she just burst into tears and said she didn't know why she failed, but she did not kill her husband. The officers told Lindley the circumstantial evidence against her was mind-boggling, and she stood up and said, "I have to go pick up my kids," and they let her go. You know, a polygraph test is not concrete evidence, and no witnesses had confirmed that she left the spa on the 8th at any other time. I'm not sure what other circumstantial evidence they had, maybe besides her financial problems, her cheating, and her text messages. But her phone records showed that she was at the spa the entire time Ben would have been home and killed. Even if she was the primary suspect, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office had no proof to convict her. In the meanwhile, Lindley actually made an announcement in December on Facebook. She and her boyfriend Brandon were expecting a baby. People were shocked. Ben, who lived next door, loved Lindley. He loved talking to her regularly, even after Ben's death. But there was just something suspicious about her. He contacted the police and reported that Lindley was moving on a little too fast in his opinion. The police already knew all about Brandon. This was exactly what she did with Ben, so it shouldn't have been that much of a surprise. Remember, she met Ben not long after her previous relationship ended, and she got pregnant. It doesn't necessarily mean anything sinister, especially since they were having an affair. At this point, she was single, considering her husband was deceased. Even though it looked bad doing this so soon afterward, people grieve in a number of ways. Lindley had her baby, and the police continued to look through all the messages between Lindley and Ben, as well as Michael, but the case went cold for 2.5 years. Corporal Faust then had a family emergency and was no longer able to work on the case, so it was taken over by State Trooper Nathaniel Schaefer. He didn't have much experience with murder investigations, so Trooper Schaefer looked through all the evidence. Based on Lindley's poor performance on the polygraph, he focused on her and ruled Sam out as a suspect. From his point of view, it seemed pretty obvious that Lindley had been accusing Sam of getting in fights with Ben over the land, then sold the land. Why would Lindley accuse Sam unless she was trying to redirect the investigation and shift the blame from herself to someone else? This was his theory. He felt like she was the common denominator in everything and had a lot to gain from Ben's death, way more than Sam did. The reptile community continued to speculate about what happened to Ben. Was his wife involved? Had she hired a hitman? Was it revenge? A failed robbery? It could be anything. Sam still didn't think Lindley had anything to do with this. He called the highway patrol every other week for updates, but there never were any. Sam was scared that even though he didn't live on the 72-acre property anymore, whoever hurt Ben could still be out there, and they could hurt him. Or worse, they could hurt the kids. He thought it was weird that Lindley didn't want to bring the kids over to hang out with their family or their cousins anymore. He didn't understand why she didn't like him, and he still had not gotten access to his brother's ashes. Trooper Schaefer told Sam that Lindley was actually their #1 suspect. Sam was up in arms. He said, "No, I disagree. We might not get along, but she is harmless. You've seen her picture. I've been putting it up on the screen. But I have to say, everything that glitters is not gold." Even with happy posts about having a baby, Lindley's new relationship was not going well. Lindley's dad, Lion, noticed Brandon had a temper. He was a big guy, and once even threatened to kick Lindley's dad's ass. They started becoming scared of Brandon. Lindley reported him because he had gotten physical with her, and he was arrested but released because there wasn't enough evidence to hold him. Then Lindley hired an attorney and filed an order of protection against Brandon, saying that he was a threat to her, her children, and her family. Brandon violated the order 12 times. This man texted her over 150 times a day and stalked her wherever she went. One time, his mother even called Lindley and warned her to leave her house because Brandon was on his way there. Brandon had actually told his mother he was on the way to Lindley to go sleep in her driveway. I mean, this guy was controlling. He was manipulative. If he couldn't have her, nobody could. Finally, he went to jail for felony stalking and for violating the protection order. But then in January of 2020, police got a call from a man named Mr. Blackwell. This was Brandon's dad. And he said Brandon wanted to talk to him about Ben Rennick's murder. Officer Schaefer pulled up to the jail, met with Brandon, and said he was there because Brandon used to date Lindley. Brandon said yeah, and he wanted to confess the entire story of their relationship and Ben's murder. Brandon said he and Lindley met online on a dating site in April of 2017, and they fell in love. They had a baby together, but then Lindley accused him of threatening her, which he said he had never done. She broke up with him and got a restraining order, but Brandon wanted to see his kid. It was okay if they weren't living together and weren't together, but Lindley wasn't letting him see his child and was accusing him of all this stuff that he said he never did. He claimed he never stalked her and he didn't violate the order 12 times. But I'm thinking, Wouldn't they have proof of that? Not according to him. Not even once did he do anything out of line. She just wanted him in jail. Somehow, this man made a deal with Officer Schaefer. If he would tell the story of Ben's murder, he could get out of jail. They were desperate for answers, and Brandon was the closest they had gotten to any kind of insight. Remember, I told you that in order to solve this case, they knew someone would have to confess to something that they knew that nobody else did. When they asked him where his information was going to come from, his literal words were, "They're going to come straight from the horse's mouth," meaning Lindley had told him everything he was about to share with the officer. Brandon said Lindley had sat him down while they were vacationing in a cabin. He had told her if they were going to be together, he needed to know everything, the full truth of what happened with Ben, if she knew anything. For some reason, he said Lindley agreed. She was paranoid and wanted to get something off her chest. But she also wanted to make sure their phones were in separate rooms to avoid being recorded by the government or the police. Then he said she dropped a major bombshell. According to Brandon, she told him she killed Ben. I was not expecting that, but remember, this is Brandon's version. He wants to get out of jail, so detectives have to keep that in mind and also have an open mind. Brandon said Lindley's spa had been going downhill for months, and she asked Ben for money. But $44,000 wasn't enough to pay back all of her debt. So she had actually been secretly withdrawing money from Rennick Reptiles without Ben's permission. Well, Ben wasn't stupid. He figured it out. She knew that he knew, so Ben finally put his foot down and texted Lindley, accusing her of siphoning money out of his business. Lindley got scared. Brandon said she thought Ben was not only going to leave her, but take everything, including the kids. I mean, wouldn't anyone leave you after you're cheating and stealing from them, especially since Ben was actually trying to help his wife? Brandon said Lindley knew Ben had the money to win any legal scenario, so she began getting scared, thinking that he would take the kids away and abandon her with all of her debt. Brandon said Lindley decided a divorce wouldn't be enough, so she started to plot Ben's murder. He claimed that Lindley went to her co-worker and good friend Ashley and told her everything. Lindley told her the easiest ways to kill Ben would either be poison or a gun, neither of which Ashley or Lindley had access to, but they figured the poison would be easier to get since Ashley knew how to get narcotics. Ben and Lindley regularly drank protein shakes in the mornings and evenings, and they would always get a bunch of these for free from representatives who came into the spa. So, in midday, Lindley crushed up narcotics that she got from Ashley and put them in a protein shake for Ben. Incredibly, he did not die, but he got super sick. He was vomiting over and over again and couldn't get out of bed. Somehow, he survived through the night and had no clue that he had been poisoned. He thought it was a bad shake or just some food poisoning. Brandon explained that Lindley was still scared that Ben was going to run off with the kids, so she thought about people who might have a gun. That's when she remembered her ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. He was fresh out of jail, a meth dealer. So what did she do? She recruited him. He started coming in for what she referred to as regular massages, but this was actually a meeting to plan the murder. On June 8th, Michael came to the spa and picked Lindley up in his truck. He brought his gun and a pair of gloves, and they left for New Florence, leaving both of their phones at the spa with Ashley. So it would appear as though they hadn't left the location. Ashley was in charge of texting people for the next 2 hours to create an alibi for both of them. That's actually really clever since most people do get caught due to their reliance on their phones. But we don't know if any of this is true. Brandon said before Michael and Lindley skipped town, Michael realized he was out of gas. Lindley got really angry because they needed to stop. After they did, they made their way to Rennick Reptiles. Now, Brandon tells this version of what happened next. He explained that when they arrived in front of Rennick Reptiles, Ben was outside taking out the trash. They didn't expect him to be outside, so they abandoned their plan and left the car without the gun. Lindley actually introduced Ben to Michael, saying that Michael was one of her old friends who wanted to see some snakes. But Ben was a little confused because this was so spur of the moment. Still, he was nice enough to show Michael around. After that, they left, And that's when Lindley and Michael got into an argument in his truck. She asked Michael to go kill Ben, and he was like, "No, I can't do it." He also said he didn't want her to be angry if she ended up regretting it, but Lindley said she had made up her mind. That's when she put the gloves on, took the gun, and went back into Rennick Reptiles. That's when Lindley told Brandon that Ben said, "What the hell are you doing?" And she shot Ben right in the face, and then multiple times in his back, according to Lindley and according to Brandon's story. Michael just watched everything and then helped her clean up the shell casings, though he wasn't able to gather them all. Then, Michael drove them back to Columbia to the spa, and Lindley showered and scrubbed all of the gunshot residue from her body. Ashley helped her clean up all of her clothes, and Michael got rid of the clothes in a dumpster somewhere. That was quite the story. After Brandon was done with his confession, the police were in shock. Brandon apologized for withholding this information, but said it was weighing on him. After his confession, all of his charges were dropped. He got what he wanted. He was let out of jail. I kept thinking, just like that, he's free? Anyone could just make up a story. Were they even fact-checking this? Remember the crime scene. Ben was lying on his stomach, facing the south wall. It was unlikely that Ben saw Lindley come up behind him. What evidence was there that Lindley had been the one to do it? Michael had been there the whole time and hadn't accused her. Detective Schaefer had to find out if Brandon's story had any truth behind it. But I was thinking, shouldn't you have done that first before letting this man out of jail? So he got a warrant to access Ben and Lindley's private Facebook messages. This can take a while. I've heard it can even take years to get these. But he was scrolling through to see if there was any talk about the protein shake. Interestingly enough, there was a message where Ben asked if Lindley had tried to kill him with the protein shake. So Brandon knew at least one detail of the story that the police didn't, and that seemed real. So was he telling the truth? I was thinking it's actually quite normal for someone to joke around and say, "What were you doing trying to kill me?" My mom used to say things like that when something tasted really bad. So I was kind of surprised by what happened next. Investigators told Sam and the rest of Ben's family they were making an arrest. On January 16th, 2020 at 12:01 p.m., Lindley Rennick was arrested in Columbia on the charge of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Michael Humphrey was found in Jefferson City at 6:45. P. Mand was arrested on the same charges. They conspired to kill Ben. But who had really pulled the trigger? They were held without bond for the first few days, and then went to separate detention centers, where Lindley was held on $1 million bond. But the investigation wasn't over yet. Brandon's testimony was shaky at best. Police then talked to little Miss Ashley Shaw. Ashley did not show up with an attorney, and she talked about her job, her kids, and what was going on in her life without knowing that she could be charged as an accessory to murder. The officer showed Ashley the message between Ben and Lindley, where Ben asked, "Did you try to kill me?" Ashley said, "What?" and claimed it was a joke. She explained that it was a brand new kind of shake. Lindley and Ben both got sick, but it was just common food poisoning. Some of those wellness shakes are pretty nasty, but Schaefer did not believe her. At this point, he looked at Ashley and told her she could either be on the side of Missouri or the side of Lindley. Team Lindley was going to jail. That was a threat. It implied that if Ashley didn't confess, she was certainly going to jail. And I don't know about you, but if I heard that, I would get a lawyer right away. But Ashley just changed her story. She said Lindley and Ben's marriage was heading for divorce, and a few months before Ben was killed, Lindley told Ashley that Ben had inappropriately touched her in her sleep. Lindley had woken up in the middle of the night, and please excuse me for saying this, but said that he was violating her with his hands, his fingers to be exact. Ashley said she was horrified by this information. She had been friends with Lyle for a long time, over a decade, and she couldn't imagine something like this happening. We won't know if it's really true. Lindley definitely had reasons to make it look like Ben was a bad guy. Ben had allegedly apologized and said it would never happen again, but according to Ashley, Lindley didn't trust him anymore. Lindley said this wasn't the first time Ben had exhibited controlling and concerning behavior. But Ashley told them she'd never seen any evidence of bruises. She wanted to believe her friend about what was going on. And, of course, you're gonna side with your friend, you want to be there for them, and I get that. But that's when Ashley said that Lindley asked her if she or her boyfriend had a gun. Ashley said she didn't, and asked what for. Lindley said she wanted to kill Ben because she was scared that he would run off and get custody of the kids. Now this is sounding very similar to Brandon's story. Together, Ashley and Lindley looked up how many prescription pills it would take for an overdose. Ashley asked her boyfriend if he knew anyone who had prescription painkillers, and her boyfriend got her 15 Percocet through a friend and gave them to Lindley. That's when Lindley made the deadly protein shake. She blended them up in a magic bullet at the spa and took them home to Ben. The next morning, Ashley got a text that said it didn't work. Then Lindley called, and on the phone, she sounded frustrated. Of all things, Lindley told Ashley she'd made her own unlaced protein shake and pretended she got sick when she drank it too so Ben wouldn't suspect anything. But somehow, he made it through the night. How heartless and cold would you have to be to do this? I just cannot even imagine thinking and saying these things to someone. Then Ashley went with Lindley to her ex-boyfriend Michael's trailer, Michael Humphrey. Ashley drove, and their cover story was that Michael was installing a new speaker in Ashley's car. When they arrived, Lindley asked Michael if he had access to a gun, and he said he did. She explained that her husband was abusive and that she tried to kill him. She wanted to know if he would consider coming with her to confront Ben at their house. She said Michael owed her for getting her addicted to painkillers back when they were together. Michael said he would think about it. Apparently, this was just supposed to be a threat towards Ben. Ashley told the police that Michael came back to the spa a few days later. The cover story this time was that Michael needed his car jumped, and a few estheticians at the spa were going to help him out. Lindley, Ashley, and Michael talked in one of the spa rooms, and Lindley confirmed that Michael would provide the gun. A few days later, on June 8th, again according to Ashley, she witnessed Michael pick Lindley up from the spa. She had all three of their phones in her possession. She said she used Lindley's phone and sent Ben a message that said, "Hey, I'm sick. I'm not feeling well and need to go lay down. Can you pick up the kids from school?" So that means Lindley's text, which served as her alibi, was a text that Ashley had sent. I can't believe this whole story. But Ashley said Lindley returned 2 hours later, took all of her clothes off, jumped in the shower, and then asked Ashley to scrub her body, her hands, everything. Then Michael showed up and asked Lindley if Ashley knew what happened. Lindley said, "Ashley doesn't know anything," and Michael nodded and left. Then Lindley told Ashley that Michael had shot Ben. She also confessed that she was angry at Michael for having to stop and get gas before they went over there. They stopped at the Phillips 66 before leaving town, and Lindley had paid for the gas. She was worried that they were going to get caught on surveillance video and that her alibi would be shattered. Days after that, Lindley changed her story about what happened the day Ben was killed and who did it. She told Ashley that Michael got too nervous and that, once we got there, I was fine to do it, and he handed me the gun, and I did it. So she had killed Ben. Ashley told the police Lindley didn't seem sorry, but Ashley started feeling sorry for her. On June 19th, when the police found out that Lindley was texting Michael Humphrey, Lindley asked Ashley to text Michael and warn him that the police were coming to talk to him and that he needed to keep his mouth shut. Remember that thumbs up? I wonder if that really was an accidental text. A year later, Lindley told Brandon the truth of what happened. Then Ashley, Michael, Lindley, and Brandon all met up to get on the same page. So now this is really starting to seem like it's the truth. While this entire testimony was being used to corroborate Brandon's story, she'd been the one to tell Brandon about the protein shakes. So this really didn't tell us any new information other than Ashley being an accessory. But now she had full immunity for agreeing to help them and provide all of this information. Officer Schaefer then went through Lindley's credit card history and was able to confirm that she had gotten gas from Phillips 66 around 3:45 p.m., about 40 minutes before he suspected Ben was killed. Even if Brandon and Ashley were exaggerating, all of these details were matching up. Sergeant Schaefer worked with Michael and Lindley's prosecution to put a timeline together of all of Lindley, Ben, and Michael's messages, as well as financial records. I'm not going to go into every little text in detail, but I will mention that Ben texted Lindley in May, saying it felt like they weren't having sex anymore, and he wasn't even sure if she was still interested in him. It really does. Then Lindley texted him back and described him forcing himself on her in her sleep. He was caught off guard after that. Apparently he texted back, he apologized and promised to do better, and they discussed going to marriage counseling. So maybe that story was true. Then he asked if there was anyone getting between their marriage. Lindley told him she still loved him, and there was no one else, but we know that's a lie. Both of them had made mistakes, but it seemed like one of them was after a more severe punishment. Michael's trial was held in October of 2021, and according to the prosecution, Michael had gone with the sole purpose of killing Ben for Lindley. This was based on both Brandon and Ashley's testimony, his criminal history, as well as the fact that the 2 bullets shot on the floor had been done by someone taller than Lindley, who was only 5 feet 3 inches, while Michael was over 6 feet tall. It was perfectly plausible that Lindley told Michael he owed her and convinced him to bring the gun and kill Ben for her. Michael testified in his own defense, and sometimes that can go a little wild. He said that Lindley had shown up at his trailer with Ashley, and he hadn't seen her in 6 years when she asked him to kill Ben. He thought she was joking. But remember, we've heard they planned for a week. During this time, Lindley threw out the possibility that she would kill Ben, but didn't decide on it yet. Then on June 8th, Michael said he picked her up, and Lindley told him she changed her mind about murdering Ben. She didn't want to do it anymore. She just wanted Michael to come there and support her emotionally because she was going to ask Ben for a divorce. Michael said he thought this was going to be a peaceful resolution. They stopped at Phillips 66. Lindley paid for gas. They showed up and Ben was taking out the trash. Lindley said Michael was a friend from high school who wanted to see the snakes. Ben hesitated, but he let them inside. Michael said he was looking at snakes, and then he heard a gunshot. He ducked and turned towards Lindley, and she was at the end of the corridor holding a gun. He went out the door and got into his car, hearing the sound of more gunshots behind him. Then Lindley ran out, freaking out. Michael said he didn't know where the gun came from, that it wasn't his. He was just there, and he wasn't the one to pick up the shell casings either. Well, I don't know who he thought the story was going to convince, because Ashley said Lindley didn't have access to a gun, and Michael knew a lot of felons, people who owned guns, including himself. In late October, the verdict was reached. Michael was found guilty of first-degree murder and the charge of armed criminal action. His sentencing was scheduled for January 3, 2022. The police knew that Michael would most likely get life in prison without parole for killing Ben. They also knew that the person they suspected even more, Lindley Rennick, was currently sitting at home on house arrest because her defense attorney, Catherine Berger, had somehow convinced the judge that, because of COVID, Lindley needed to go home to take care of her kids and her dad, who had medical issues. Since Lindley had no criminal history, the attorney wanted to know if it would be possible for her to be placed on electronic supervision, house arrest, until her trial. The judge actually agreed. So, the police and the prosecutor saw this as a bad sign for Lindley's trial. They really didn't have enough concrete evidence against her for the jury to convict her. I watched these Zoom videos of her trying to convince the judge, and in those moments, I saw the power she had to manipulate. She interrupted her own lawyer, and the judge was stunned. He was like, "Wait a minute, do you want her to talk?" But the lawyer allowed it, and it was very telling to me.
And then, hang on just a second. All right, did somebody else?
I think my client was gonna say something.
Okay, Ms. Rennick, did you want to say something? Do you want her to say something?
That's fine, Your Honor.
I don't know if it makes a difference, but my home confinement would be at my dad's, and that is in Boone County. They're in Columbia, and so I know you had mentioned that they had a service through the port that you would use. I don't know if that has any bearing on it, that I wouldn't be in Montgomery County on home confinement. I would be at my dad's in Columbia.
We understand that, Lindley. I'm gonna talk to you about trying to pay for it. Okay, that's the issue right now.
Surprised to today because The insurance company also has concerns about her causing the death of her husband.
That is incorrect.
You don't want her saying anything, do you?
So they struck up a deal with Michael Humphrey. They told him that they could change his charge to second-degree murder, drop the armed criminal action charge entirely, and this would give him the option of life with parole. He would need to do a couple of things first. He would need to testify against his ex-girlfriend Lindley in her upcoming trial. And second, he would need to tell them where the weapon was. If he were there, they said he knew who the gun belonged to and who shot it. If he took responsibility for the gun, he could still claim that Lindley killed Ben, but had possibly used Michael's weapon to do it. Finally, Michael agreed to these terms. He waived his right to appeal his sentence. He was backed into a corner. So he told them the gun was his and that he knew where it was. It was kept in his current girlfriend's mom's attic, crawl space, underneath a big pile of insulation. The investigators got a warrant for the house where it was hidden. They went up to the attic, and sure enough, the gun was there. It was a .40 caliber Springfield, and they sent it off to the lab for testing, but it came back having no DNA that belonged to Lindley. But remember, Michael had brought gloves to the crime scene. On January 3, 2022, Michael was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. He tried to appeal his sentence, but remember, he already waived his right and he's currently spending his days at Jefferson City Correction Center. But let's wrap everything up. At one of Lindley's pretrial hearings, the prosecution came forward with the gun, and this was a shock. I watched this in the trial and I was like, wow, that was a bold move. They had the murder weapon. There was concrete evidence that Lindley had participated in Ben's murder. Michael had no reason to be there on his own. They had conspired together. But it still wasn't clear who shot the handgun. Lindley's trial was in Boone County, and it started in November of 2021. The prosecution attorneys, Kelly King and Nathan Kars, started their opening statements, saying that Lindley shot and killed Ben, picked up her kids from school, and took them home, knowing that these kids were at risk of seeing their father in his last moments. They said that Lindley used Michael Humphrey's gun and that her motive was that she wanted Ben's life insurance. She needed it to keep the spa afloat. The defense consisted of Tim Heisman and Catherine Berger, and they tried to convince the jury that Lindley was an open book. She cared about her kids and would never want bad. Lindley brought Michael with her as a mediator because she was going to ask for a divorce. They said that she was outside Rennick Reptiles when she heard gunshots, and Michael ran outside. She was in denial and didn't know Michael killed Ben until she returned home that evening. What? That doesn't even make sense to me. You wouldn't go in and find out if someone just killed your husband after you hear gunshots. I'm not buying it. The prosecution brought several witnesses forward, including Ashley Shaw and Michael Humphrey, who told their stories. This time, Michael's story lined up perfectly with Ashley's. He claimed that he had provided the gun and that they planned to kill Ben the entire way to Rennick Reptiles, but he had decided not to at the last minute because he didn't want Lindley to be mad at him. Brandon Blackwell also testified. He said that Lindley lied to police to get him thrown in jail so that she could get custody of their child. Brandon was now taking care of his child, and Lindley had filed a petition of defamation against him while she was on house arrest, but it didn't go anywhere. But the defense, when questioning Brandon, pointed out that Brandon's story was sketchy. First of all, he said that Lindley pointed the gun at Ben while he was facing her, and from the evidence, that's not true. Also, the defense attorneys had talked to other people in Brandon's life to find out more about him in the protection order. This is interesting. In Lindley's protection order, she said that Brandon had threatened to go to the police several times and tell them she had murdered Ben if she left him and took away their child. So Lindley knew that leaving Brandon would result in him accusing her of Ben's murder. She was hoping that this was just an empty threat from Brandon, but the fact that he was threatening her and had controlling behavior meant she did not want him around the kids. But then, while listening to Brandon's calls from jail, as well as other conversations with other people in jail, he said things like, "I'm gonna ruin Lindley's life. I'm gonna get out of jail and I'm gonna burn that." So anything he had to say about Lindley could not be 100% honest because it was tainted with revenge. which I kinda had a feeling. An esthetician from the spa, Rachel Hunt, was another witness for the prosecution. Rachel said that Lindley had told her they were going to murder Ben with a gun before it happened. Rachel didn't call 911 because she didn't want to be a part of anything, and she had heard that Lindley couldn't divorce Ben or he would take the kids. She said that on June 8th, all the estheticians were told to cancel their appointments. Michael came and picked up Lindley, and Rachel and Ashley, who were roommates at the time, walked to the convenience store and the bank in order to establish an alibi. Then when Lindley came back, Rachel was told to go into the break room, and she could not hear any of the conversations between Lindley and Ashley. Rachel said that Ashley said Lindley had blood on her clothing, but Rachel never actually saw Lindley's clothes. Rachel also testified that the day after police got Ashley's testimony, Ashley had gone home and told Rachel that the police were going to ask Rachel for her story. Ashley said to tell the police everything. Now, I don't know if Rachel had discussed the details of the story with Ashley, but since they were roommates, I assume they did. Even Rachel's testimony may not be the most accurate version of events. I'm getting somewhere with this, but I want to tell you these things. Catherine, the babysitter, testified for the prosecution as well, and I found this fascinating. Lindley texted to postpone their meeting up until between 5:45 and 6 p.m., but while Lindley was still driving home before 6 p.m., she called Catherine to cancel the babysitting gig entirely over the phone. She said she couldn't reach Ben, so maybe Catherine shouldn't come. So Lindley wanted to cancel the date plans for Wonder Woman with Ben before she even got home from picking up the kids. She knew that Ben had been shot, but did she know that Ben had died? Her story was starting to unravel when the defense attorney asked Catherine if she knew Lindley well. Catherine said, yeah, she'd been babysitting the Rennicks for years. And when asked if Lindley knew how to shoot a gun, Catherine also said yes. She told the jury that Lindley had posted pictures on Facebook of her target practice, but the question was, did she know how to shoot using Michael's gun? That's when we finally get Lindley's version of the story. Lindley was no longer feeling safe in her own home after Ben's alleged forced actions, and she wanted a divorce. But according to her, she didn't think it would be safe to confront Ben on her own. He had gotten physical with her, according to her, allegedly on several occasions, including pushing her into the fridge and grabbing her arm. She came to work with bruises on her arm. She did everything in her power to make sure he wasn't angry at her. She would send him nude photos. She would apologize for the spa's financial problems, whatever it took. She never wanted to file a report against him because she loved him, and she would never kill him. In the weeks leading up to his death, she even had a moment where they both drank a bad protein shake and joked about it later. These are her words. She thought maybe everything was going to be okay, but she says he went back to his old ways. I can't help but feel like she's lying. After all, Ashley said she never saw bruises. There was never any report of this. But I have to tell you the story anyway. Lindley apparently asked Ashley to come with her to ask Ben for a divorce, but Ashley's boyfriend told her not to go because he didn't want her to be in the same room with Ben. Not after everything he'd heard about Ben's violence. So Lindley looked up her ex-boyfriend Michael because he was big, he was tall, and he was intimidating. She got his address off of court records and she asked Michael to come with her. She gathered up her personal belongings from the house and Michael agreed. It took a week of Lindley going back and forth before she truly decided she wanted a divorce. Michael picked her up and she accidentally left her phone with Ashley at the front desk because that's where she usually kept it during the day. They drove to Rennick Reptiles, where Ben was taking out the trash. Lindley said she was just working up the courage to ask him for the divorce. She introduced him to Michael as her friend from high school. Then she told Ben to give Michael a tour of the facility, and she took out the trash, dropped it in the dumpster, and then followed the two of them inside. It sounded at that point like the men were having an argument. She said, I walked up right behind Michael, and then Michael turned around, and she saw a gun in his hand. Then she heard shots, screamed, and ran outside. She then heard more shots, and everything just went numb. She remembered staring at the trees. Remember that Michael Scarlett, Ben's neighbor, said he heard a woman scream, sometime in the afternoon. Lindley implied that was her screaming when Ben got shot, not later when she found his body. She says that Michael ran outside and pushed Lindley into the truck. He threatened that he would kill her if she didn't keep quiet. So she disassociated, and she said she was in complete shock. When she got back to the spa, she was in a delirious haze, and Lindley didn't know at this point if Ben was alive or dead. She went into the shower to scrub off the memory from her body, wondering why Michael would even bring a gun. Then she texted Michael and hoped he had gotten home safe, asking him to come in the next day for another massage. That's when Ben wasn't answering her messages, so she was concerned. She was thinking, what if Ben was seriously hurt? Had he been hit by the gunshots? This story just sounds so fake. You wouldn't go check on your husband, but she was being pushed in the truck, remember? At this point, she said she canceled with the babysitter and prayed that her husband would still be alive. The next day, she said she talked to Michael and asked him, "Why did you do it?" Michael said he had a friend from jail who had committed homicide. Michael told her when he asked the felon how to stop someone from abusing their wife, he said, "Kill them." So Michael did. Lindley wondered if he was high on meth that day. She was so upset she didn't plan to talk to him ever again. When prosecutors asked Lindley why she lied so many times to investigators, she started to break down crying, which I have to say she's pretty good at. She can just let the tears flow on demand. She said she didn't want to be implicated in Ben's murder, and she thought it would look like she was conspiring to kill him. Really? You know, they say that the simplest explanation is usually the right one. It looks like she's conspiring to kill him. When asked if she knew deep down who killed him, she sobbed and said yes, and she apologized to Sam. Sam watched her entire performance and was sick to his stomach. He did not think this was a true apology. He thought she was a sociopath, trying to garner sympathy from the jury, putting on the waterworks with her innocent little deer in the headlights look. The defense painted the entire picture, and I have to hand it to them. They did an awesome job. I still had so many questions. Why would Ashley lie and say Lindley didn't have bruises? She still cared about her friend. And if she really had bruises, it would have made more sense why she lied to investigators about the murder. Why would Michael leave his phone with Ashley and Lindley if they weren't planning a murder? Even if Lindley had not shot the gun, there were 4 different stories claiming that she had premeditated this, not once, but twice. If they did it as a plan, she would be guilty of whoever shot the gun. The jury deliberated for 12 hours, and Lindley was found guilty in December of 2021 of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. The jury recommended that she receive life in prison. You may not believe how long she was sentenced, but maybe you will. 16 years. 13 for murder and 3 for armed criminal action, to be served consecutively. Then she'll go back to her life. The judge was frustrated by the sentencing because, in Missouri, judges are not allowed to change the jury's decision. He told Lindley, "You're awfully lucky, ma'am. I just hope you don't kill again." Lindley will be in the Correctional Center of Missouri until 2035, and I just checked my calendar. She'll be eligible for parole in 11 years. At the end of the day, I think it's some kind of combination of all of these stories. I do believe that Lindley wanted to kill Ben for his money, and because she thought he was going to divorce her and be able to leave with the kids. She was cheating on him with the men that we know of, and using her poor husband to fund her spa project. She manipulated her ex, Michael Humphrey, into carrying out the murder for her. Based on the way the bullets hit Ben and the fact it was Michael's gun, I think Michael probably pulled the trigger, but Lindley was the one with the motive, and she was there every step of the way. She's a really good liar, and she could put on the waterworks. I'm sure Ben wasn't a perfect person. We are all flawed. He lived his life wanting to make a legacy for the Rennick name and to provide for his children, spending as much time with snakes as possible, even taking in Lindley's child as his own. Sam thinks if Ben would have known Lindley was cheating, he would have ended things. He would have stuck up for himself, gotten a divorce, and gained custody of his kids. He would have been a millionaire, but all of that potential was ripped away from him, and it all boiled down to money and greed. Sam said that Lindley's sentencing was an injustice. He doesn't feel his brother's life is just worth merely 16 years, not after everything the children and his family went through. Ben's death will haunt Sam forever, but the Rennick name lives on through the Rennick ghost, putting a picture on the screen, and through stories that captivate his creative, kind, generous, and loving personality.